Chapter 1354. Chu Xiu was not an arrogant person. He had always been very clear about his own strength. He had 100% confidence in defeating his enemy. In reality, he would also make a battle plan based on that 90% confidence. Chu Xiu had never underestimated Yi Weikong, so he did not feel that Yi Weikong would die just like that. The clear sky illuminating shadow was indeed powerful. It was even the strongest divine ability that Chu Xiu could grasp at the moment. However, it was not enough to instantly kill Yi Weikong. Back then, Jun Wuxian was only at the 7th heavenly layer. Later on, he was heavily injured to the 5th heavenly layer or even lower. Yet, he still survived the clear sky illuminating shadow. The current Yi Weikong was even stronger than Jun Wuxian at his peak. Could he be instantly killed by a single slash from Chu Xiu? However, in this space, there was indeed no life to speak of. Just as Chu Xiu was still thinking, snow began to fall from the clear sky. The snowflakes did not disperse. Instead, they condensed into Yi Weikong's face. There was no physical body. Instead, it was a huge, human face completely condensed from snowflakes. It floated in the air just like that. Yi Weikong's voice was like thunder. It was deafening, but at the same time, it contained the powerful might of the world. Chu Xiu, do you think you can kill me just like that? Naive. The mortal body is nothing but an illusion. Only the laws of the world are eternal. The frigid river turning snow isn't me turning into snow. It's me turning into the laws of the world. As long as the world doesn't perish and the seasons continue, I can exist forever. A mere mortal body has forced you to use all your trump cards. Chu Xiu, no matter how scheming you are, you won't be able to escape death today. The gigantic human face in midair laughed maniacally, its voice shaking the void like a thunderous roar. At that moment, Chu Xiu only stared at the human face and indifferently spat out 2 words, madman. Yi Weikong had gone mad. He was possessed. It wasn't qi deviation, but spirit deviation. He had walked into the most extreme and impossible path. Earlier, Chu Xiu had been wondering why Yi Weikong was able to reach the 8th heavenly layer martial immortal. One must know that Yi Weikong had been trapped at the 7th heavenly layer martial immortal for a very long time. Furthermore, with his age, it was likely that he would not be able to make another breakthrough in his lifetime. In the end, he was seriously injured by Fang Yinglong last time, but he was still able to step into the 1st layer of heaven. This in itself was somewhat unreasonable. After suffering a setback, he would endure hardships and then break through the little universe. This in itself was a very ridiculous thing. If anger and hatred could allow people to break through, then these Daoist warriors would probably be lining up to be humiliated. Now, Chu Xiu finally understood that Yi Weikong didn't break through in anger, but in anger. Ordinary martial immortals would be controlling the laws. However, the current Yi Weikong was being controlled by the laws. Transforming one's body into the laws was easy to say, but how strong was the power of the laws in this world? Even a Dao master could not completely control one of the rules. Yet, Yi Weikong had abandoned his physical body and completely transformed into the laws of this world. In theory, he was indeed undying and indestructible. But the problem was, how insignificant was his willpower when compared to the laws of this world? It was so insignificant that it was indescribable. The true power of laws was the Tao, the countless great Daoists in this world. The great Daoists were emotionless, and the laws were also emotionless. They shouldn't have their own thoughts. Thus, it wouldn't take long for Yi Weikong to be completely assimilated by the laws of this world, and become a part of the laws of this world. At that time, he would indeed be undying and indestructible. However, if he lost his intelligence, could he still be considered a human? Yi Weikong had abandoned his physical body, but little did he know that only with his physical body present could he be considered a human. Chu Xiu sighed, "You all really know how to play. The stronger your cultivation, the more daring your thoughts will be. There will come a day when you will play yourself to death. Since you want to die so much, I can help you. It can be considered as freeing you. I've only thought about this before, but I haven't used it yet. Today, I can court death and give it a try here. The erosion of the laws of heaven and earth on Yi Weikong was huge. It had only been a few sentences, but Yi Weikong's mind was already a little unclear. He was probably only left with obsession and instinct, the obsession to kill Chu Xiu. The huge human face in midair bit down, and wherever it passed, everything began to freeze. Everything that could be seen was frozen, and even time and space that couldn't be seen were frozen. Facing such a powerful attack that was comparable to the power of heaven and earth, Chu Xiu took a deep breath and formed a seal with his hand. The green sprout formed by the manifestation of the creation demonic path bloomed in Chu Xiu's palm. However, this time, it wasn't an attack. Instead, it was drawing upon the power within his body. It was the power of origin within his body. Last time, Chu Xiu followed the records left behind by the Sanskrit and was ready to court death by activating the power of the origin of yin and yang. But the result wasn't very good, and he was directly injured by the backlash. However, when he went deep into the core of the origin and felt the power mixed in the origin, it also gave Chu Xiu a kind of enlightenment, or a bold idea. He felt that he had comprehended a mystique. That's right, it was just a feeling. Even Chu Xiu wasn't sure if he could use this mystique normally. For a long time, the mystique that Chu Xiu possessed could actually not be truly comprehended by him. The law embodiment of heaven and earth was an ancient mystique of unknown origin. The clear sky illuminating shadow was a powerful mystique that belonged to Dugu Weiwei. The cross-shaped lotus seal should only be considered half of Chu Xiu's. Without the Subhuti treasure tree, Chu Xiu wouldn't have been able to comprehend it. And now, the mystique that Chu Xiu was about to use was the true mystique that belonged to him. Facing the huge face, the yin and yang origin in Chu Xiu's body had already been activated by the creation demon path. Based on the previous experience, this time, Chu Xiu used less power to activate the yin and yang origin. Of course, the result was the same. The power that couldn't be controlled once again filled Chu Xiu's body, as if it wanted to tear him apart. The yin and yang origin really couldn't be controlled. The key point wasn't how much power Chu Xiu activated, but how much power the yin and yang origin exploded. It was like the vibration produced when the yin and yang origin merged for the first time. It happened to be within the suppression range of Chu Xiu's full strength, so he could directly increase by one level. However, it was a pity that such a situation was something that could only be chanced upon and not sought for. Later on, when Chu Xiu and Chu Xiu took the initiative to draw upon the power of the yin and yang origin energy, it had exceeded the limits of what he could endure, just like what was happening now. Therefore, there was only one way to deal with power that he couldn't bear, and that was to pour it out. Forming a seal with his hands, Chu Xiu's entire body turned into a yin and yang body. Half of it was shrouded in pitch-black demonic qi, while the other half was suffused with a dazzling golden light. The two kinds of power were held in Chu Xiu's hands. His physical body was almost unable to bear this power, and traces of cracks appeared. And it wasn't just his physical body. This power even tore at his spirit, giving Chu Xiu a splitting headache and almost making him faint. At this time, Chu Xiu was completely relying on instinct and willpower to forcibly control the power in his hands. Yin was below, yang was above, and he put his palms together and twisted. The moment the yin and yang power combined, there was a loud explosion. The entire world had changed at this moment. The sky was yang, and the earth was yin. The two combined, entangled, and tore at each other, reproducing the chaos. The yin and yang power were like two huge millstones, sandwiching the huge human head that Yi Weikong had transformed into. Under the grinding, any existence would be crushed and turned into the purest power of chaos. Even if Yi Weikong could turn himself into the power of the laws in this world, under the grinding of the yin and yang grind, the world would reappear in chaos, and any power of laws would dissipate. This was a great magic that could directly point to the power of origin. Worldly millstone, furnace of good fortune. This was the magic that Chu Xiu had comprehended after comprehending the yin and yang origin power. The former used the yin and yang power to transform into a worldly millstone, crushing everything, and any power of laws would turn into nothingness. The latter used the power of chaos to reenact the furnace of good fortune, construct the laws, and recast the power of the world. However, with Chu Xiu's current strength, the latter was only a deduction, and he didn't have the qualifications to use it at all. Of course, even if it was the worldly millstone, Chu Xiu could barely use it now. At that moment, Chu Xiu's yin and yang origin power had been unleashed, and he had returned to his original appearance. However, the impact from the yin and yang origin power caused traces of blood to appear all over his body. He was like a shattered doll that would shatter with the slightest movement. As the yin and yang power fused into chaos, the laws in the sky had been completely shattered. Yi Weikong was dead. With his body transformed into laws, the laws in this world had been completely shattered into chaos. How was he supposed to continue living? Not even great overarching golden immortals could save him. At that moment, Fang Baidu and Su Tianya had also broken free from the battle. They stared at the scene before them, dumbfounded, as if they didn't dare to believe their eyes. Earlier, Fang Baidu had felt that their attack this time around wouldn't be that simple, and that they would likely encounter some obstacles. However, he didn't expect the result to be completely different from what he had anticipated. Yi Weikong was an existence of the 8th level of martial immortal. Although he was a martial immortal who had gone astray and become a demon, he was still an 8th level martial immortal. In the end, Yi Weikong had also died by Chu Xiu's hands. That scene made them feel like they were in a dream. Su Tianya looked to Fang Baidu and said with a deep voice, "Do you still want to fight?" The strongest Yi Weikong had died. It seemed like they had already lost. However, Fang Baidu discovered that they might still be able to put up a fight. The divine ability Chu Xiu had used to kill Yi Weikong was indeed very powerful. It was so powerful that even Fang Baidu was trembling in fear. However, Chu Xiu had also paid a great price for that. He had been crippled, and his aura was extremely weak. As Wei Shuya had helped Chu Xiu unleash the rootless sacred flame, although he wasn't injured, he had exhausted all of his power. It would appear that the only person present that still had the battle power of a martial immortal was Qingqing Di. They could still fight this battle. They could win. Chapter 1355. Fang Baidu felt that it was not an illusion that he could win. Although he and Su Tianya, the two prime venerables, had always been at a disadvantage in front of Chu Xiu and looked very cowardly, in fact, both of them had the strength of a 4th heaven martial immortal, and it was possible for them to fight against a 6th heaven or even a 7th heaven martial immortal if they joined forces. Chu Xiu's strength was indeed shocking and even frightening, but now that Chu Xiu had been crippled and there was only Qingqing Di left, what else did they have to be afraid of? Fang Baidu shouted without turning his head, "Ling, use the wheel of the illusory moon to trap Qingqing Di. Fei Hong, help your master put on the dragon scale armor to block those shrimp soldiers and crab generals. I will deal with the rest." As soon as Fang Baidu finished shouting, he saw a beam of moonlight soar into the sky, split the space, and directly imprison him in it. At the same time, Luo Feihong also held the dragon scale armor in his hand, but he did not activate it. Instead, he looked at the two of them vigilantly. Fang Baidu and Su Tianya looked incredulous. "Ling, Feihong, what are you doing?" With an innocent expression on her face, Long Ling shook her head gently and said, "Master, I didn't want to do this, but since you want to attack Cult Master Chu, I have no choice but to do it." Luo Feihong also said helplessly, "Master, although you are good to me, Chu Xiu is even better to me. In this situation, it is not the time to talk about Jianghu morality. At this time, Fang Baidu and Su Tianya's faces were as gloomy as water, and the expressions on their faces were extremely distorted. They understood everything. How could there be so many coincidences in this world? They had just lost a disciple, and now 2 more outstanding disciples had come to their door. They had just been teleported to Cold River City, but Chu Xiu had already received the news and was prepared in advance. They thought that there was a spy in Cold River City, but who would have thought that the spy had been nailed to him all along? Fang Baidu glared at Chu Xiu with bloodshot eyes. It was as if he wanted to skin Chu Xiu alive. Chu Xiu, you are ruthless. How vicious. Not only did you kill 2 of my disciples, you even destroyed 2 of my disciples. No, to be precise, they were never our disciples in the first place. Now that you have the inheritances of our 2 lineages and the artifacts of our 2 lineages, do you think you can defeat us? Today, even if I have to risk my life, I will take you down with me. Fang Baidu was really mad with rage, and so was Su Tianya. He was even ready to burn his blood essence to fight for his life. The 2 of them were both martial immortal level experts. Yet, at that moment, they were being toyed around by Chu Xiu like 2 fools. Even their only hope, their disciples, had been arranged by Chu Xiu. Even Fang Baidu, who had always been calm and collected, couldn't stand this kind of grievance and humiliation. He wanted to perish together with Chu Xiu. However, at this time, Chu Xiu didn't take the opportunity to attack. Instead, he said calmly, "You two, it seems that there was no great hatred between you and me from the beginning, right? It's true that I killed your disciples, but it was because they were bewitched by the disciples of swordsman Ling Tian's lineage and came to make trouble for me. That's why I killed them." In other words, a disciple who can be easily bewitched by others' words can't be a great person. Are you sure that such a person can inherit the mantle of dragon subduing and Guyu lineages in the future? Of course, in the end, no matter who is right or wrong, I killed your disciples, but now I have returned them to you. Isn't that enough? As soon as Chu Xiu said this, Fang Baidu and Su Tianya, who were about to fight desperately just now, were stunned and looked back subconsciously. Long Ling smiled and said, "Master, please forgive me. I was only following orders and had no other choice. I had a sect before, but I didn't have a master. If Master is still willing to accept me as a disciple, I am willing to inherit the mantle of Guyu lineage and pass it on." Su Tianya was also good to Luo Feiheng. Upon hearing this, Luo Feiheng glanced at Long Ling and hurriedly said, "I am the same as her." Chu Xiu's suggestion to surrender was not a sudden idea, but a plan he had made beforehand. In addition to the information about the World Sword sect leading the attack on the eastern region, Long Ling also gave him a suggestion. She suggested that Chu Xiu not kill Guyu and the dragon subduing faction, but try to persuade them to surrender. Fang Baidu and Su Tianya were the most typical primeval venerables. Most of the time, they were unwilling to step into the Jianghu and chose to cultivate in seclusion. The most important thing in their lives was to cultivate a qualified disciple so that they would have the face to meet their ancestors in the future. If their disciples could be more outstanding than their ancestors, then their lives would be worth it. Therefore, regardless of whether it was the battle for supremacy of the 4 regions or the battle for providence, they actually did not care much about it. Even when the 2 disciples were killed by Chu Xiu, they were already relieved. This time, if Sheng Jiuyuan had not threatened them, they would not have made a move. Therefore, as long as Chu Xiu could defeat Yi Weikong, it would not be impossible to persuade them to surrender. Su Tianya and Fang Baidu looked at each other with a complicated look in their eyes. Should they fight or surrender? To be honest, they really could not bear to part with Long Ling and Luo Feiheng. Under the premise that most of the genius disciples had been recruited by the top Daoist sects, the talent and potential of these 2 people could be said to be the highest they had ever seen. It could even be said that their potential was higher than that of the disciples they had recruited before. In the future, let alone inheriting their mantle, it was even possible for them to surpass them or even their ancestors. Although they still had some grudges against Long Ling, and Luo Feiheng for being Chu Xiu's people, when they thought about it, they were Chu Xiu's people before, and it was the latter case for them to acknowledge him as their master. If they could make them renounce darkness for light, in just a few months, they could not believe how great their charm was. After a long silence, Fang Baidu said, "Even if you kill Yi Weikong and we give up on attacking, you will still lose this battle. The World Sword Sect is not targeting the Kunlun Devil cult, but the entire Eastern Territory. Now, we don't even know what the High Heaven Sect and the Imperial Sky Pavilion are like, and there are several martial immortals there. How are you going to fight? When the High Heaven Sect and the Imperial Sky Pavilion are destroyed, the Kunlun Devil cult will not be able to hold on alone." Chu Xiu said lightly, "Before I came, they couldn't hold on. Now that I'm here, the result will be different. I already know the plan of the World Sword Sect. How could I possibly not have made any preparations? Besides, the World Sword Sect will not expect me to appear in front of them." Fang Baidu's and Su Tianya's expressions changed slightly. There was absolutely no problem with the plan of the World Sword Sect before, but now the existence of Chu Xiu and the existence of the Kunlun Devil cult itself was the biggest variable. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Both of you, now that things have reached this point, there is no room for neutrality. The world of great battles has begun. Even if both of you want to live in seclusion in the mountains, you will be dragged out of the mountains. So now, both of you only have two choices. One is that I killed 2 of your disciples, and now I will compensate you with 2 more disciples. Both of us can forget our past enmity, settle our grievances, and join forces from now on. I promise that as long as the Kunlun Devil cult does not perish, the Zhenlong and Guyu lineages will continue to exist forever. As for the second choice, you and I will fight to the death today. Both of you can choose for yourselves." As soon as Chu Xiu said this, Su Tianya and Fang Baidu looked at each other and fell silent. After a long while, Long Longer called out softly, "Master." This call of master seemed to give Fang Baidu a way out. He snorted coldly and said, "Since you know I am your master, why don't you untie the illusionary moon wheel for me?" Hearing this, Long Longer subconsciously looked at Chu Xiu. Seeing Chu Xiu nod gently, she immediately untied the illusionary moon wheel and respectfully handed it to Fang Baidu. Fang Baidu snorted coldly and said, "Forget it, you can keep holding on to this thing. I have no intention of taking back what I have given away." Although Fang Baidu had made a choice, it was impossible to say that he did not have any grudges in his heart. However, this choice was already the most beneficial for them. Chu Xiu laughed and said, "Both of you, you will know in the future what kind of right decision you have made." Su Tianya snorted coldly and said, "Right? You'd better solve the crisis in front of you first. Right now, the Sword Sect and the Imperial Sky Pavilion are besieging the High Heaven Sect and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. You have been seriously injured after killing Yi Weikong. What else do you have to reverse the situation in the Eastern Territory? Although the Kunlun Devil cult is not weak, apart from you, there are not many people who have high-end combat power. You should know that the entire Sword Sect has the 4 great sword seniors." Su Tianya and the others had now admitted defeat. On the surface, they shook hands with Chu Xiu and made peace, but in fact, they had surrendered. However, after all, the two sides had accumulated grievances for a long time. Su Tianya subconsciously argued with Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu did not care and said to Fang Baidu, "Venerable Fang, your Guyu clan has many secret techniques. I heard that you have a secret technique called the moon shifting technique, which can quickly transfer the power of one's vitality and repair one's physical body, right?" Fang Baidu glanced at Long Longer angrily. This information must have been leaked to Chu Xiu by this little traitor again. Of course, none of that mattered anymore. Fang Baidu nodded and said, "There is indeed such a method. However, cult leader Chu, your injuries are too serious. If you want to transfer your injuries completely, you'll have to find a martial immortal to mend your body. However, in that case, this martial immortal will be temporarily crippled due to the loss of vitality. It is not worth it to exchange a martial immortal for a cultivator. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, I don't need a martial immortal. The heaven and earth profound enlightenment realm cultivators under my command have very rich vitality. With that, Chu Xiu looked at Lu Jianghe, causing Lu Jianghe to shiver. Chapter 1356. Lu Jianghe now felt that Chu Xiu was very unkind. Every time something good happened, Chu Xiu would not be there, but when it came to this kind of thing, he would be there. Seeing that Chu Xiu wanted to make him bleed again, Lu Jianghe hurriedly said, Great Cult Master Chu, are you trying to kill me? Your physical cultivation is even stronger than Qingdi's. How can my qi and blood be enough to repair your body? Seeing that Lu Jianghe was so scared, Lu Fengxian smiled and said, Count me in. Our qi and blood together should be enough. Fang Baidu looked Lv Fengxian up and down, then nodded and said, With you, it should be enough. Chu Xiu did not refuse. He nodded and said, Thank you, Brother Lu. Lu Jianghe muttered, I also donated blood. Why don't you thank me? Chu Xiu ignored Lu Jianghe and asked Fang Baidu to perform the Great Moon shifting skill as soon as possible. One had to admit that the various secret skills of the Guyu lineage were indeed amazing. Even if Chu Xiu ate elixirs like jelly beans, it would take him more than a month to recover from his injuries. But with Fang Baidu's secret skill, after extracting the qi and blood of Lu Fengxian and Lu Jianghe, Chu Xiu's physical injuries were instantly healed to the peak. As for the consumption of strength, there was no need to worry about it. Chu Xiu would be able to replenish it when they were on their way. But there was no such thing as perfection in this world. The various powerful secret skills of the Guyu lineage were indeed amazing, but their combat strength was a little low. That was why the Guyu lineage and the dragon-subduing lineage had been on good terms for generations and became allies. The two sides could complement each other. After stretching his body, Chu Xiu waved his hand and said to Shang Tianliang and the others, Let's clean up the other Cold River City survivors first. Those who surrender will be spared. Shang Tianliang and the others did not ask what would happen if they did not surrender. It was not their first day in the Jianghu. Was there a need to ask if they did not surrender? After cleaning up the cultivators of Cold River City, Chu Xiu waved his hand and removed the rootless sacred flame array. Chu Xiu asked Fang Baidu, Venerable Fang, is it possible if we teleport to Cold River City now? Fang Baidu nodded and said, It's doable. I've also forged a formation plate that can locate the coordinates of Cold River City. However, don't even think about sending so many people over. I don't have that much power. At most, I can only send less than 100 people. Wei Shuya thought and said, it should be closer to High Heaven Sect. Cold River City or High Heaven Sect is closer to High Wei Sect, Shuya. Wei Shuya thought for a moment and said, it should be closer to High Heaven Sect. The distance between us and Imperial Sky Pavilion is the same as the distance between Cold River City and Imperial Sky Pavilion. Just when Fang Baidu thought that Chu Xiu would let them teleport to Cold River City first and then go to High Heaven Sect, Chu Xiu suddenly said, leave a small number of people to guard the Kunlun Devil cult. Brother Lu, old Lu, I will leave these people to you. You have lost too much vitality and are no longer fit to fight. The others will come with me to Imperial Sky Pavilion to rescue them. Fang Baidu was taken aback when he heard this. What kind of trick was this? Giving up what was near and seeking what was far away. However, Fang Baidu seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed abruptly. He looked at Chu Xiu with a complicated expression, and there was even a hint of fear in his eyes. It was only now that he finally understood why he was unable to establish a sect like Chu Xiu even though his strength wasn't bad. Although strength was very important to establish a sect, ruthless methods were even more important. Otherwise, the sect they had spent so much effort to establish would probably be destroyed in less than 2 generations. At this time, in Imperial Sky Pavilion, the cultivators of Imperial Sky Pavilion had already fought with the people of Martial God Sect and Great Thousand Sect to the point where they were almost exchanging lives for lives. The two sects launched a pincer attack, and the Great Thousand Sect, which was proficient in spirit arrays, had completely broken the defensive spirit arrays of Imperial Sky Pavilion. They could only use human lives to fill in the gaps. Zhong Qiushui used all his strength and forced Mu Shenxiao and Sikong Jialua to retreat with the Imperial Heaven Sword, but he was also close to exhaustion. Tao Qianming came over and said in a deep voice, "Sect Master Mu, launch an all-out attack and destroy Imperial Sky Pavilion in one go. Don't waste any more time." Mu Shenxiao waved his hand and said, "Although the soldiers in despair may not win, the power that they burst out at that moment is amazing. Sect Master Tao, don't worry. It's not easy to cultivate the disciples of our sections. Why do you have to force them to their deaths? Let's wait until they can't hold on any longer, then we'll make our move." The Martial God Sect had always been famous among the Daoist people for their strong physical cultivation and close combat secret techniques. Everyone thought that the cultivators of the Martial God Sect were rough and simple-minded strong men. However, Mu Shenxiao's eyes were shining with cunning. Even Tao Qianming was ashamed of his inferiority. 2 hours later, Mu Shenxiao saw that the Imperial Sky Pavilion had gathered all their disciples, but he did not make a move. Instead, he shouted, "The forces of the eastern region are weak, and the Imperial Sky Pavilion is doomed. Why do you want to fight to the death for the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Even without the Imperial Sky Pavilion, there is still the Martial God Sect. All the disciples of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, if you surrender now, I promise in the name of the Martial God Sect that you can join the Martial God Sect directly. When the southern region completely devours the eastern region in the future, the territory of the Imperial Sky Pavilion will still belong to you. You'll just have to change the name. You only have one chance. Do you want to join the Martial God Sect and welcome a new era of great competition, or do you want to fight to the death with the Imperial Sky Pavilion? It's up to you." Previously, the Imperial Sky Pavilion had gathered all their disciples. It was obvious that they wanted to fight to the death. Everyone's morale had risen to its peak, and they were ready to die. However, who would have thought that the Martial God Sect would not choose to attack at this moment? Instead, they were asking them to surrender. This made some people waver in their resolve to die. They wanted to fight in one go, but if they let it go, they would not be able to make up for it. Previously, when Chu Xiu was in the Imperial Sky Pavilion, he had already sensed some loopholes in the Imperial Sky Pavilion, or rather, shortcomings. The Imperial Sky Pavilion was not united enough. Previously, when the old Pavilion Master was around, he was fair and did his best for the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Therefore, he was loved and respected by everyone in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, after Li Wuxiang became the Pavilion Master, he recruited his trusted subordinates and suppressed those who disagreed with him. As a result, the entire Imperial Sky Pavilion was divided. Most people were either on Zhong Qiushui's side, or they were playing it safe and only cared about their own interests. Although Zhong Qiushui became the Pavilion Master later on, it was too short a time for him to change the situation. At this moment, those who were willing to fight to the death with the Imperial Sky Pavilion were either Zhong Qiushui's trusted subordinates or those who were promoted by the old Pavilion Master. They were loyal to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. As for those who previously belonged to Li Wuxiang, as well as those neutral martial artists who maintained an attitude of self-preservation, they were shaken. A cultivator threw down the weapon in his hand and shouted, "I'm willing to surrender. I'm willing to join the Martial God Sect." That cultivator was not weak. He was a heaven and earth enlightening realm elder in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. He was definitely one of the higher-ups in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. As soon as he made the first move, it was like a chain reaction. The other cultivators in the Imperial Sky Pavilion surrendered one after another. In an instant, 1/3 of the people present had surrendered. Jianghu wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and cursed, "These ungrateful ***stards. If it wasn't for the Imperial Sky Pavilion, they wouldn't be where they are today." Although Jianghu was a slippery person and had some petty thoughts, he was personally promoted by the old pavilion master. He might not be loyal to Zhongqiushui, but he was loyal to the old pavilion master and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Zhongqiushui sighed and said, "Everyone has their own ambitions. Let him be." However, Zhongqiushui's eyes were flickering with a determination to die. He gripped the Imperial Heaven Sword in his hand tightly. The ancient greenish-bronze sword was stained with his blood and emitted a dazzling and majestic aura. It's fine if the Martial God sect and the Kiliakosm sect want to annex the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Since you're not strong enough, you deserve to be annihilated. However, I wonder how many people from the two sects will die with the Imperial Sky Pavilion? The expressions of Mu Xianxia and the others froze. Zhongqiushui alone was not scary, but the Imperial Heaven Sword in his hand was scary. A top-notch sect like the Imperial Sky Pavilion that had existed for more than 10,000 years was not that easy to annihilate. The other party was so weak that he did not even have the strength of a martial immortal. No one knew what kind of trump card he could pull out. However, as long as they could exhaust Zhongqiushui to death and seize the Imperial Heaven Sword, no one in the Imperial Sky Pavilion would be able to stop them. The strength of the Martial God sect would also improve. Just as the despairing Zhongqiushui was about to sacrifice what little vitality he had left to activate the power of the Imperial Heaven Sword, a voice suddenly rang out. "Pavilion Master Zhong, it's not your style to be so pessimistic. We're not at the end of the road yet. What are you doing?" When Zhongqiushui, Jianghu, Lu Sanjin, and the others heard this voice, their eyes flashed with surprise and even ecstasy. Chu Xiu did not disappoint them. On the other side of the battlefield, a large group of Kunlun Devil Cult martial artists emerged and joined the battle without hesitation. At this moment, Mu Xianxiao and Tao Qianming were in disbelief. Yi Weikong and two prime sovereigns of Cold River City had attacked the Kunlun Devil Cult together, but they had failed to defeat the Kunlun Devil Cult. Moreover, Chu Xiu was still full of energy, and it was impossible to tell that he was injured. It was only then that Mu Xianxiao noticed Fang Baidu and Su Tianya who were standing behind Chu Xiu. The expression on their faces could no longer be described as shock. It was as if they had seen a ghost. 3 martial immortals went to attack Chu Xiu. Yet, as they fought, 2 of them ended up attacking Chu Xiu instead. Chapter 1357. Whether it was Mu Xianxiao of the Martial God sect or Tao Qianming of the Kiliakosm sect, they were very confident in the battle to invade the eastern region. With the World Sword sect taking the lead and several primeval venerables, how could they not take down the declining eastern region? But when Chu Xiu really appeared here with Fang Baidu and Su Tianya by his side, Mu Xianxiao's confidence finally collapsed. He could not understand why Yi Weikong had lost and why these 2 would betray him. Fang Baidu and Su Tianya felt a little embarrassed when they met Mu Xianxiao's and Tao Qianming's gazes. Both of them were from the primeval venerables bloodline and were usually very virtuous, but now they had become traitors. It was not nice to hear. Mu Xianxiao pointed at the 2 of them and said angrily, "Fang Baidu, Su Tianya, you 2 are primeval venerables and martial immortal realm experts. How could you surrender to Chu Xiu just like that? He, Chu Xiu, killed 2 of your personal disciples and almost severed the inheritance of your 2 lineages. How could you tolerate such a deep hatred and be willing to be Chu Xiu's dogs? How shameless are you?" Mu Xianxiao's words made Fang Baidu and Su Tianya's faces darken. Su Tianya scolded, "I'm shameless, but you're shameless? Brother Fang and I weren't prepared to come this time. We were forced to come by you." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Mu Xianxiao, what you said is wrong. What do you mean by being Chu Xiu's dogs? I have great respect for Gu Yu and the two primeval venerables of the dragon-subduing bloodline. Isn't it normal for them to renounce darkness for light? The southern region martial world is restless and wants to snatch something that doesn't belong to you. You even forced others to snatch it with you. You can't blame them for betraying you. Since all of you have come this time, don't think about leaving. As soon as Chu Xiu's voice fell, he slashed out with the formation-breaking sword in his hand. The sword swallowed the sky with boundless power. Chu Xiu could persuade Fang Baidu and Su Tianya to surrender. Because the deepest conflict between them was because Chu Xiu had killed their disciples. However, as Chu Xiu sent Long Longer and Luo Feiheng over, the deepest conflict between them had been resolved. Therefore, there was still a possibility that the two sides could work together. However, Chu Xiu had killed a lot of people from the Battle God sect. Moreover, the Battle God sect was also ambitious. It was impossible for the two sides to reconcile. There was no point in talking too much nonsense. He could just use his fists and knives. Mu Shenxiao shouted angrily. His entire body emitted a faint golden radiance. Countless mysterious runes enveloped his body and attached to his bronze armor. Every punch and kick was so powerful that it seemed like it could shatter the heavens and the earth. The power of the Sky Devourer could tear the void. However, Mu Shenxiao used the extreme power of his physical body to tear the huge black hole that the Sky Devourer had slashed out. In the next moment, Chu Xiu slashed out with the formation-breaking sword in his hand. Several ethereal slashes fell and the invisible sword radiance appeared around Mu Shenxiao. However, he could not find where the sword radiance was at all. He could only see the boundless sharpness of the sword radiance enveloping him. With a loud shout, Mu Shenxiao's body shone brightly. An 8-armed demon god Dharma form appeared behind him. Only the upper body was visible, but it enveloped his entire body. The sword radiance erupted from the void and slashed at the demon god's body. There was a series of explosions, but it was blocked by the opponent. In the next moment, the 8 arms behind Mu Shenxiao pinched a seal at the same time. In mid-air, the 8 forces of heaven, earth, wind, thunder, water, fire, mountain, and swamp condensed at the same time. Zhong Qiushui hurriedly shouted from behind, "Be careful. This is the secret magic of the Battle God sect, the Divine Martial 8 Extreme Seal." The 8-armed demon god controlled the 8 forces of heaven and earth. With a shout from Mu Shenxiao, the 8 seals smashed towards Chu Xiu. However, in the next moment, the 6 paths of reincarnation had already risen. The 6 paths of reincarnation rotated. The divine power of the heavenly Tao was vast, the murderous aura of the Azura Tao soared into the sky, and the power of the mortal Tao obliterated everything. The 6 paths of reincarnation were against the 8 extreme seals. Martial skills were used against magic skills. However, Chu Xiu's 6 paths of Saha Woman Wondrous Splendor Wheel was not at a disadvantage at all. Mu Shenxiao's eyes were instantly filled with shock. This was the first time he met Chu Xiu and also the first time he fought with Chu Xiu. However, it was not the first time he had heard of Chu Xiu's name. In fact, it was like thunder piercing through his ears. Their Battle God sect had suffered many losses in the hands of Chu Xiu. In the southern region, Chu Xiu was also very famous. The blissful demon palace was destroyed by him. The Brahma sect's Vishnu palace was also destroyed by him. Mu Shenxiao felt that it was extremely unreal for a previously unknown person to suddenly appear in the Daoist continent. Only when he fought with Chu Xiu today did Mu Shenxiao realize that Chu Xiu's reputation in the Daoist continent was not just for show. In the next moment, Mu Shenxiao directly shattered the Divine Martial 8 Extreme Seal. Immediately, a violent wave of earth energy spread across the entire area. The 8-armed demon god Dharma power behind Mu Shenxiao began to shrink abruptly. Finally, it shrunk into his body. 8 arms appeared behind him like a big spider, which looked very evil. However, at this moment, Mu Xianxiao's aura shot up to the sky. He was like an ancient demon god that was born in desolation. Zhong Qiushui shouted from behind, "Be careful. That's the battle god sect's divine ability, the battle god body." However, before Zhong Qiushui could finish shouting, Chu Xiu's body was already covered with golden Buddhist light and pitch-black demonic aura. Chu Xiu used the holy demon invincible body to the extreme and headed straight for Mu Xianxiao. Chen Qingdi stood beside Zhong Qiushui and said faintly, "Calm down. Who do you want to be careful? Mu Xianxiao?" Zhong Qiushui opened his mouth, but he suddenly realized that his warning was a little unnecessary. At this moment, Chu Xiu and Mu Xianxiao had already started fighting fiercely. The battle god sect was most proficient in close-range killing techniques. The battle god body had evolved the rules of power to the extreme, just like the ancient demon gods that had evolved their physical bodies to become the most suitable for combat. On the other hand, Chu Xiu's holy demon invincible body was the simplest of the great Tao. It fused the indestructible golden body and the nine heavens fiend golden body, and unleashed its power and defense to the extreme. Although it wasn't as flexible as Mu Xianxiao's battle god body, it used power to break all techniques and directly beat up his opponent. 8 arms might not be a match for 2 hands. Their punches and kicks combined, and the explosion of pure power even tore the surrounding space apart and smashed the rules. Mu Xianxiao was, after all, an existence of the 6th heavenly layer martial immortal. Even though he could not do anything to Chu Xiu would not be able to defeat him in close combat. However, at this moment, Sikong Jialua couldn't hold on any longer. He shouted to Mu Xianxiao, "Sect Master, let's retreat. We can't hold on any longer." Just as he shouted, he was instantly hit by Su Tianya's divine dragon tail and vomited blood. Previously, Mu Xianxiao said that they were dogs for Chu Xiu, which made Su Tianya extremely angry. He might not be a match for Mu Xianxiao, but wouldn't he be a match for the rest of the battle god sect? Therefore, he directly targeted Sikong Jialua and seriously injured him in a fight. Su Tianya always suffered losses in Chu Xiu's hands and seemed very weak. But in reality, he was a true 4th heaven prime venerate. His divine dragon subduing general lineage's body tempering secret technique was no weaker than the battle god sect's secret technique. Mu Xianxiao was fighting fiercely with Chu Xiu just now, but because Chu Xiu was too strong, he didn't have the time to pay attention to the situation below. But when he did, his eyes immediately turned red. In the short time he exchanged blows with Chu Xiu, more than half of the battle god sect's people had been slaughtered by the Kunlun devil cult. The strength of the Kunlun devil cult's cultivators was beyond Mu Xianxiao's imagination. In terms of the strength of his disciples, only the Sky Luo Treasure Temple's Transformation Pavilion and Sanskrit's Shiva Temple's average quality could compare with the Kunlun Devil cult's cultivators. Although the battle martial god sect was not weak, their quality was still a far cry from the other two. Mu Xianxiao gritted his teeth and shouted, "Tao Qianming! Cover us with the formation, retreat." He had just shouted half of the sentence when he forcibly swallowed the other half. His face even turned red. It was only now that he realized that Tao Qianming hadn't uttered a single word since Chu Xiu appeared. When he looked just now, he realized that Tao Qianming and the formation masters belonging to the Great Thousand sect had already disappeared without a trace. Tao Qianming could be said to be extremely slippery, and he didn't offend anyone in the southern region. However, when he saw Chu Xiu coming, and Fang Baidu and Su Tianya standing beside Chu Xiu, Tao Qianming knew that they had lost this time, and it could even be said that they had lost miserably. At this stage, what was the point of fighting if they didn't escape? Although he didn't want to offend the battle god sect, he had no choice but to offend them at this stage of life and death. Therefore, when Mu Xianxiao and Chu Xiu exchanged blows, he used the formation of the Great Thousand sect to escape. Tao Qianming. Old Tao, you deserve to die. Mu Xianxiao cursed angrily. He had no choice but to let the other people of the battle god sect retreat, and he would cover their retreat. Chu Xiu sneered and said, "You're only thinking of leaving now? It's too late." Just as Mu Xianxiao was about to retreat and his fighting spirit was starting to fade, Chu Xiu used the law embodiment of heaven and earth. The giant body of 1,000 zhang tall smashed Mu Xianxiao to death. Even though Mu Xianxiao had the battle god body, he still spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he couldn't retreat. With a roar, Mu Xianxiao's qi and blood erupted, and a huge 8-armed demon god Dharma form appeared behind him. It began to wrestle with Chu Xiu's law embodiment of heaven and earth. However, the law embodiment of heaven and earth could be said to be a manifestation of the rules of power that had evolved to the extreme. Even though Mu Xianxiao was burning his qi and blood, he was gradually suppressed. Seeing that some of the disciples of the battle god sect had left, Mu Xianxiao didn't intend to hold on any longer. The 8-armed demon god Dharma form behind him suddenly exploded, and a boundless blood mist shrouded Chu Xiu. At the same time, he shouted to Sikong Jialua, "Retreat! Retreat!" Sikong Jialua had just broken free from the entanglement with Su Tianya. However, the next moment, Fang Baidu suddenly formed a seal with his hand, and a moonlight shrouded Sikong Jialua. It split the space and imprisoned him on the spot. Chapter 1358. Although Fang Baidu and Su Tianya were primeval venerables, it did not mean that they were naive and unscrupulous as the scheming old foxes in their sections. Previously, they had come to the World Sword sect because they were threatened, so they did not have to contribute. However, now that they had openly betrayed the World Sword sect and sided with Chu Xiu, they would offend both sides if they did not contribute. Therefore, Fang Baidu and Su Tianya did not hold back at all this time. Their strength was on par with Sikong Jialua's, and Su Tianya was slightly stronger. However, with Fang Baidu's help, the two of them had a tacit understanding and would even dare to fight a 7th heaven martial immortal, let alone Sikong Jialua. With Fang Baidu's intervention, Sikong Jialua was killed by Su Tianya in just a few moves. There were only 2 martial immortals in the entire war god sect. Now that one of them was dead, Mu Xianxiao was driven mad with hatred. However, his rationality told him that if he did not leave now, Chu Xiu, Fang Baidu, and Su Tianya could definitely kill him here. Therefore, Mu Xianxiao did not stop at all. The blood and qi around him burned wildly. Like a blood-colored meteor, he tore through the space and disappeared in front of everyone in the blink of an eye. However, before he left, Mu Xianxiao glared at Fang Baidu and Su Tianya, his eyes filled with intense killing intent. Compared to Chu Xiu, the main culprit, these 2 traitors were even more hateful. Chu Xiu did not chase after Mu Xianxiao when he fled. There was no formation constructed by the rootless sacred flame here. If a 6th heaven martial immortal wanted to escape, it was unknown whether Chu Xiu could catch up to him. Perhaps Chu Xiu could catch up to the battle god sect by exhausting their strength. However, in that case, the battle god sect might have already reached the southern region. Chu Xiu did not have the time to be calculative with the battle god sect. The martial god sect's losses in this battle were already shocking enough. The war god temple's temple master, Sikong Jialua, had died in battle. The entire war god sect had already lost a large number of people when they attacked the Imperial Sky Pavilion. After that, a large number of them had been killed by the Kunlun Devil cult. Almost half of them had died. This kind of loss was a great blow to the warring divine sect, and it was something that could not be made up for even with time. At this moment, Zhong Qiushui, Lu Sanjin, and the others from the Imperial Heaven Pavilion dragged their injured and exhausted bodies over. They bowed deeply to Chu Xiu and said in a deep voice, "Thank you, Cult Master Chu, for lending a helping hand. If it weren't for Cult Master Chu, there would be no Imperial Heaven Pavilion among the Daoist people." Chu Xiu helped Zhong Qiushui up and said, "In the past, I was also born in the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. The old pavilion master treated me well. Now that the Imperial Heaven Pavilion is in trouble, how can I not help? Moreover, the people from the Southern Territory are targeting my Eastern Territory this time. Besides Yu Weikong and those other traitors, how could I possibly stand by idly? Zhong Qiushui let out a long sigh. His emotions were extremely complicated. If he had seen the might of the Kunlun devil cult when it was founded, he could still treat Chu Xiu as an equal. But now, he was truly convinced. He had also seen it clearly. The era of great competition had arrived. So what if they were martial immortals? So what if they were a 10,000-year-old sect? The rules and common sense of the past no longer counted. Everything had to be based on strength. Now that the Imperial Heaven Pavilion had no strength, it was useless even with the Imperial Heaven Sword. At this moment, Zhong Qiushui finally understood that an external object could not save the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. At this time, Chu Xiu waved his hand and brought all the cultivators who had betrayed the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. Except for a few who resisted fiercely and were killed, the others were captured alive. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Pavilion Master Zhong, I'll leave these traitors to you to deal with. After all, they are all people of the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. I still have to rescue High Heaven Sect, so I won't chat with Pavilion Master Zhong any longer." Zhong Qiushui nodded and said, "Cult Master Chu can rest assured. Leave the traitors here to me. I wish Cult Master Chu victory." After saying so, Zhong Qiushui turned his gaze to the cultivators who had chosen to betray the Imperial Heaven Pavilion just now. His eyes flashed with dense murderous intent. Zhong Qiushui had no intention of sparing these people's lives. Traitors were always more hateful than enemies. Moreover, Zhong Qiushui could not forgive them. Even if he let them go this time, they would still betray him in the future. When it came to being a traitor, there would always be a second time. Therefore, for most traitors, they only had one chance. From Kunlun Devil Cult to Imperial Heaven Pavilion, Chu Xiu traveled quickly, but from Imperial Heaven Pavilion to High Heaven Sect, Chu Xiu's speed slowed down. Nominally, Chu Xiu said that the cultivators under his command had consumed too much energy after a battle and needed to replenish their strength. But in reality, Fang Baidu had a guess as to what was going on, but he did not dare to say it. To Chu Xiu, a powerful eastern region was not as useful as a crippled eastern region. Perhaps, to him, a powerful eastern region was not as useful as a crippled eastern region. At this time, the battle in High Heaven City was far more intense than Chu Xiu had imagined. It had even reached the point where both sides were going all out. High Heaven Sect knew that this was a battle that would determine the fate of the Eastern Territory. At present, High Heaven Sect was the leader of the Eastern Territory. Imperial Heaven Pavilion could surrender, Kunlun Devil Cult could also surrender, but only High Heaven Sect could not. The sword sects of the world would not accept their surrender. At the same time, the sword sects of the world also knew that they had paid so much for this battle. They could only win, not lose. The soaring heaven seal turned into a majestic seal larger than the entire High Heaven City and crashed down, setting off a huge wave of yuan qi. It was as if the sky was falling. At the same time, Luo Shan held the Through Heaven sword in his hand. His sharp aura tore through the sky. The powerful force collided with the Ling Shao Wu Ji seal, smashing the surrounding yuan qi and creating a huge ripple in the air that stretched for more than 10 miles. Even the sun was blocked by the powerful ripple, causing the area within 10 miles to darken in an instant. Fang Yinglong's face was pale. His power was almost exhausted. In the past, the three of them had joined forces to control the soaring heaven seal, but now he was the only one, and his power consumption had doubled. Linghu Immortal Mountain and Qin Baiyuan were struggling to resist the attack of the sword sects of the world with the help of the spirit array, but they were constantly being beaten back by the other party. They had already retreated to the center of the spirit array. Especially Qin Baiyuan, who was not young anymore. If they continued to fight, Qin Baiyuan might not be able to hold on. Fang Yinglong smiled sadly. Although this generation of High Heaven sect was not the strongest High Heaven sect in history, it was not the weakest either. Therefore, he never thought that the High Heaven sect would be destroyed by his own hands. Fang Yinglong looked up at Luo Shan and laughed wildly. Luo Shan, do you think that the sword sects of the world occupying the Eastern Territory are qualified and have the strength to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Buddhist sects? Wishful thinking. If my High Heaven sect can't defend the Eastern Territory, then your sword sects can forget about defending it. Old thing, die with me. As soon as Fang Yinglong's voice fell, his entire body exploded into a cloud of blood mist. All the essence of his chi and blood was wrapped up by a golden origin soul and fused with the soaring heaven's infinity seal. Sect Master. The many High Heaven sect disciples below suddenly cried out in sorrow. Fang Yinglong had destroyed his own body and integrated his Yuan spirit, flesh, and blood into the soaring heaven seal to fight desperately. Their High Heaven sect had lost this battle. But the quality of the High Heaven sect disciples was really not ordinary. The disciples of the Imperial Heaven Pavilion chose to surrender in desperation, but the disciples of the High Heaven sect burst out with even stronger power than before. They fought desperately with the enemy in front of them, even going so far as to drag one of them down with them. In an instant, they brought great casualties to the sword sects of the world. In mid-air, the soaring heaven seal, which had integrated with Fang Yinglong's body and Yuan spirit, suddenly blossomed with a dazzling blood-red light. Its power shook the void, shattering the surrounding world principles, and even forming a huge black hole with the soaring heaven seal as the center. It was impossible to tell which was stronger between the soaring heaven seal and the transparent heaven sword. But Fang Yinglong was weaker than Luo Shan, so he had always been at a disadvantage. At this time, Fang Yinglong's desperate attack finally brought the two sides to the same level. Looking at the Ling Xiao Wuji seal in the air, Luo Shan sighed, why bother? Just as he spat out this sentence, the Ling Xiao Wuji seal in midair had already smashed down. At this moment, except for Luo Shan, everyone present felt a powerful momentum that belonged to the dragon vein of heaven and earth. The big seal fell in midair, as if the sky was collapsing and the earth was sinking. But under their feet, there was an earth dragon turning over, and there was a powerful force pulling and imprisoning them. Even the existence of the martial immortal realm could not walk in the air. This seal was aimed at all the cultivators below. Obviously, once it fell, whether it was the cultivators of the High Heaven sect or the sword sects of the world, they would be completely crushed by this seal and perish together. The next moment, Luo Shan waved his hand, and the transparent heaven sword floated in mid-air. He sat cross-legged on the ground and formed a seal with his hand. His Yuan spirit directly left his body and attached itself to the transparent heaven sword, replacing the sword spirit, and slashed at the soaring heaven seal. No matter how strong the transparent heaven sword was, it was just a weapon. Although the sword spirit had spirituality, it was just a sword spirit. On the other hand, Luo Shan himself was the world's #1 sword Dao master. Replacing the sword spirit with his Yuan spirit was the true unity of man and sword, which allowed him to exert the strongest power of the transparent heaven sword. Extreme power clashed with the powerful sword light that seemed to penetrate through the heavens and earth. Power, laws, space, energy, everything shattered when the two collided. The entire sky formed a huge black hole, and only a seal and a sword could be seen. Time and space seemed to have stopped in that area. In the next moment, cracks appeared on the soaring sky Wuji seal. Finally, with a loud bang, it exploded into pieces. The eyes of the many High Heaven sect cultivators present were filled with despair. Was their High Heaven sect doomed to die this time? Chapter 1359. The soaring heaven boundless seal was not necessarily inferior to the transparent heaven sword, but Fang Yinglong was not as good as Luo Shan. Even if Fang Yinglong fought with his life, he would not be able to reverse the situation. The transparent heaven sword returned to Luo Shan's hand and his soul returned, but Luo Shan's complexion had become extremely old in an instant. Although Luo Shan was very old before, he seemed to have overdrawn all his vitality at this time. His wrinkled face almost covered his eyes, and his eyes were extremely cloudy. His whole body exuded an aura of decay. Luo Shan stood up, but suddenly trembled and almost fell to the ground. A cultivator from the sword sect next to him wanted to help him up, but Luo Shan shook his head and said, "It's okay. Let's deal with High Heaven sect as soon as possible." At this time, everyone from High Heaven sect fell into despair when they saw Fang Yinglong die. But after that, some people directly fell into madness, such as Linghu Immortal Mountain. Linghu Immortal Mountain had a cold personality and was a man of few words, but Fang Yinglong, as his senior brother, had taken great care of him since childhood. At this time, seeing Fang Yinglong die and thinking of the future of High Heaven sect, Linghu Immortal Mountain directly burned his blood essence and soul. His aura erupted to the extreme, and he rushed out of the spirit array to fight the other side. Qin Baiyuan wanted to intercept him, but he could not. Unfortunately, the gap between the two sides was too big. Sheng Jiuyuan and Mu Baishuang, two seventh heaven martial immortals, joined forces and killed Linghu Immortal Mountain in a few moves. Seeing the two martial immortals of High Heaven sect die, Qin Baiyuan, the previous sect master, also fell into madness. Sword sect. Since you want to destroy my High Heaven sect, I will perish together with you today. That existence was sealed in my High Heaven sect 500 years ago. Today, I will release him. At worst, we will all die together. Luo Shan coughed and said, "Okay, no need to bluff. Although I did not participate in the battle 500 years ago, I know the inside story. Although the entire Daoist nation decided to let your High Heaven sect imprison that existence, in fact, your High Heaven sect only provided a sealed world. What really sealed that person was a seal laid down by 9 peak 9th heavenly layer martial immortals together. Your High Heaven sect cannot open it at all. Rest assured, I have heard all about how terrifying that person is. After destroying your High Heaven sect, my World Sword sect will take your place and guard him well." At this moment, Qin Baiyuan had fallen into despair and deep confusion. Fang Yinglong was dead, Linghu Immortal Mountain was also dead, and their final trump card, the Soaring Heaven Everlasting Seal, was also broken. What else could their High Heaven sect use to resist the World Sword sect? Just as Luo Shan was about to give the order for the sword sects under the heavens to disregard their lives and launch an all-out attack, a voice came from afar. The matters of the East region should be resolved by the East region itself. It's not your World Sword sect's turn to look after that person. Hearing the voice, Qin Baiyuan's eyes were filled with disbelief. Luo Shan and the other martial artists from the sword sect also had disbelief in their eyes. In the distance, a large number of Kunlun devil cult cultivators swarmed over and directly joined the battlefield. Immediately, the World Sword sect cultivators, who had already consumed a lot of their strength, were powerless to resist and had to retreat step by step. Mu Baishuang's eyes flashed with anger. What the hell is Yi Weikong doing? He, an 8th heaven cultivator, can't even handle Chu Xiu? And Su Tianya and Fang Baidu, their combined strength is comparable to that of a 7th heaven cultivator. How can they lose? Before he finished speaking, Mu Baishuang saw Fang Baidu and Su Tianya standing behind Chu Xiu. His expression suddenly changed, and he turned to look at Sheng Jiuyuan. There was no need to explain why these two people were standing behind Chu Xiu. But these two prime sovereigns were roped in by Sheng Jiuyuan, and now they had chosen to betray Chu Xiu. Did Sheng Jiuyuan not want to say anything? At this time, Sheng Jiuyuan's face was also extremely gloomy. He pointed at Fang Baidu and Su Tianya and said angrily, "What are you two doing? Don't you care about avenging the death of your disciples? How dare you betray us and become Chu Xiu's lackey?" After the battle at Imperial Sky Pavilion, Su Tianya and Fang Baidu could be said to have completely understood their position. Since they had already become traitors and had chosen to join Chu Xiu's side, what was there to hesitate about? Fang Baidu said indifferently without a trace of guilt, Sheng Jiuyuan, we didn't want to do anything back then. Who forced us to do it? You also said that the era of great competition has arrived. Even prime sovereigns can't just stand by themselves and have to choose a side. Cult Master Chu is a man of great talent and unlimited potential. He will definitely reach the peak in the future. Choosing to stand on Cult Master Chu's side is a wise bird choosing a tree to nest in. Is this wrong? Seeing Fang Baidu say this so righteously, Sheng Jiuyuan was so angry that he didn't know what to say. At this time, Chu Xiu walked over to Qin Baiyuan's side and sighed with a guilty look on his face, "Old sect master, Chu Xiu is too late." Qin Baiyuan's eyes turned red as the old sect master of High Heaven sect trembled. "It's not too late. As long as Cult Master Chu can come to rescue my High Heaven sect, it's not too late. Sect Master is dead, and so is Linghu Immortal Mountain." This old man was already prepared to perish together with them, but I didn't expect to still have a chance to live. How can it be too late? Today, this old man only asks one thing of Cult Master Chu. Destroy the world's sword sects, and from now on, my High Heaven sect is willing to serve the Kunlun Devil cult. Chu Xiu patted Qin Baiyuan on the shoulder and said, "Old sect master is too serious. This time, the southern territory is targeting my eastern territory, so everyone should join forces to deal with the enemy. How could I, Chu Xiu, be the kind of shameless villain who would fish in troubled waters?" After saying so, Chu Xiu stood up and said to Luo Shan, "Sect Master Luo, are you disappointed to see me here?" Luo Shan shook his head and said, "I'm not disappointed, I just don't understand. I can see that Yi Weikong has reached the 8th heavenly layer of martial immortal realm. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have been defeated. There's also Fang Baidu and Su Tianya. Gu Zun's bloodline attaches great importance to inheritance, and the hatred of killing his disciples is absolutely irreconcilable. How did you make them betray you? I don't understand, I really don't understand." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "If you can't figure it out, then don't think about it anymore. Old sect master, your sword sect has lost this battle, and your southern territory has also lost this battle." Luo Shan glanced at his hands that were already full of wrinkles. He was afraid that he would never be able to pick up the Understand Heaven sword again. He chuckled and said, "Lost? After paying such a huge price, how can the sword sect of the world admit defeat so easily? We can't afford to lose this battle. The sword sect of the world can't afford to lose this battle. Everyone, the Kunlun Devil cult has been added as your opponent. Can you still pick up the sword? I can't do it anymore. The future of the sword sect of the world will be in your hands." Mu Baishuang didn't say anything, but the reply to Luo Shan was a sword ray that soared into the sky. At the same time, the other two sword honorables of the sword sect of the world, Honorable Swordsman of the Nine Nether Yi Guixia and Honorable Swordsman of the Blue Sea, Ming Lan, also attacked. Sheng Jiuyuan gritted his teeth. He was already tied to the sword sect of the world and had no way out. He could only take action. Chu Xiu directly faced Mu Baishuang, while Fang Baidu and Su Tianya joined forces to face Sheng Jiuyuan. The combined strength of these two was comparable to a 7th heaven cultivator. Although it was difficult to defeat Sheng Jiuyuan, it was not a problem to hold him back. As for the remaining two, Chen Qingdi directly faced Mingji Lan, who had the strength of a 4th heaven cultivator. Chen Qingdi wasn't a true martial immortal, but his battle strength was at least around that of a 3rd heaven martial immortal. Therefore, although he felt some pressure when facing Mingji Lan, he wouldn't be too disadvantaged. Wei Shuya had expended a lot of energy previously, and Qin Baiyuan had also gone through a huge battle previously, so he was also greatly exhausted. However, the two of them working together to deal with Yi Guixia, who was only at the third heaven, was not a problem. At this moment, the two sides were actually evenly matched in strength as they fought against each other. This was the final battle, and it was also the battle that would determine the final outcome between the Eastern Territory and the Southern Territory. Mu Baishuang knew the consequences of this battle. Their sword sect had already given up everything, so they couldn't afford to lose. In that instant, Mu Baishuang had already attacked with all his strength. Countless sword lights covered the sky, and the sky was completely illuminated by the sharp lights. It was even more dazzling than the noon sun. The densely packed sword lights shrouded Chu Xiu, but Chu Xiu only slashed with his saber. Heaven-devouring saber. Countless sword lights were swallowed by the black hole. One power to destroy all techniques. However, at the next moment, the most inconspicuous sword light seemed to have passed through space. With swaying starlight, it penetrated the black hole created by the heaven-devouring saber and appeared shakily in front of Chu Xiu. The streak of swordlight was extremely inconspicuous, but the powerful sword intent it contained seemed to be able to tear apart the space around it. This was Mu Baishuang's famous remarkable power, the star-piercing small sword. It ignored the obstruction of any rules of space, and once the sword was unleashed, it would hit its target. Different from Fang Qishao's karma sword principle, Mu Baishuang's sword was based on the rules of space. As long as one was still in this space, one would never be able to dodge the star-piercing small sword. At the next moment, Chu Xiu's body suddenly expanded, and he used the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. At the same time, he also used the invincible holy demon body. In an instant, the aura around Chu Xiu's body rose to its peak. When the star-piercing small sword struck the invincible holy demon body, it actually shattered the armor formed by the powerful Buddha light and demonic aura. The seemingly unremarkable sword light pushed Chu Xiu's gigantic body back several hundred meters before he came to a stop. However, in the end, that sword did not penetrate Chu Xiu's lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. The strength of the demon god body did not lie in its strength, but also in its powerful defense. Now it's my turn. The punch shook the space, and the mountains and rivers collapsed. The lawful embodiment of heaven and earth punched out with extreme power, shaking the surrounding void. No matter how Mu Baishuang defended, he could not withstand this extreme power. After 3 punches, he was directly smashed into the ground. Chapter 1360. Chu Xiu's current state of power was very unique. To the great majority of martial immortals, cultivation represented their control over the laws. As for Chu Xiu, his control over the laws did not surpass his cultivation. However, his various divine martial techniques and power sources allowed his combat power to skyrocket. It had even surpassed the level of using the laws to limit one's realm. Previously, when he was fighting Mu Shenxiao, Chu Xiu was already confident that if his opponent did not run away, he would have a 70% chance of killing him and a 100% chance of severely injuring him. Now that he was fighting Mu Baishuang, Chu Xiu did not feel too much pressure. At the very least, he would not lose. This was not an illusion, but confidence. Perhaps after this battle, Chu Xiu could consider making a breakthrough to the 4th heaven of martial immortal. Of course, even if he did not lose, Mu Baishuang would not be easy to deal with. Mu Baishuang, who had been smashed into the ground by Chu Xiu's lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, did not seem to be moving. However, in the next moment, his soaring sword aura guided the lightning in the air and formed a lightning sword net. The lawful embodiment of heaven and earth was trapped in the lightning sword net and could not dodge. Once it came into contact with the lightning sword net, the sword aura mixed with the power of lightning would explode and destroy a part of the Dharma power. Mu Baishuang's figure charged towards Chu Xiu from underground. The sharpness of his long sword was almost tangible. Everywhere it passed, even heaven and earth were sliced into pieces. Chu Xiu smashed his fist down once again, and a powerful shockwave spread out in all directions. It crashed into the lightning sword net, and just happened to shatter it. He waved his right hand and the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet exploded with dazzling golden light. In an instant, the 6 paths of Saga miraculous splendor wheels were unleashed. They enveloped Mu Baishuang and started killing him. Swordsmen were extremely sharp. One could say that they could destroy all laws with a single sword. However, this also meant that their techniques were too simple. Therefore, the martial arts of Buddhism and Taoism could have a myriad of transformations. Each of them could point directly to the source of the great Tao, but the sword Tao could not. Over the years, the sword sects of the world were not like the Buddhist sects or Daoist sects. They did not have a 9th heavenly layer martial immortal expert every generation. The current sword sects of the world were already considered to be relatively strong. That was why Mu Baishuang could only use his sword energy to break through the samsara wheel. However, the power of the 6 paths of samsara was counteracted by the power of the 6 paths of samsara. Chu Xiu's 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet shone brightly as he tried to drag Mu Baishuang's soul into the 6 paths of reincarnation. However, Mu Baishuang's soul and will were extremely tough. He was actually able to resist the pull of the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet. But even with that being the case, his soul still felt waves of intense pain from being pulled. He was almost driven mad. Mu Baishuang suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes regained clarity for a moment. In the next moment, the sword in his hand swept out in all directions. There were no changes, but it contained extreme sword intent and battle intent. As the successor of the sword sect of the world appointed by Luo Shan, Mu Baishuang was naturally not an ordinary person. Although this was his first time coming into contact with the samsara wheel, he still thought of a way to break out of this situation in a short period of time. Only by using extreme strength to tear apart the samsara wheel could he completely break free. Otherwise, the 6 paths of reincarnation would complement each other's weaknesses. In the instant that the samsara wheel was torn apart, Mu Baishuang's body shone with a green light. He actually fused with the green dawn sword in his hand. He was the sword, and the sword was him. The green light seemed to tear apart the time and space of this world as it headed straight for Chu Xiu. The powerful aura even caused the space around Chu Xiu to freeze, making it impossible for him to dodge. The sword connects heaven and earth. This was one of the inherited powers of the world's sword sect. Almost all the martial artists of the world's sword sect would learn it. There was only one characteristic of its power, which was to transform one's body into a sword and unleash the power of the sword Tao to the extreme. In the next moment, Chu Xiu's body was already shrouded by the scorching golden Buddha light and the pitch-black deep cold demonic qi. As the holy demon indestructible body was unleashed to the extreme, Chu Xiu's saber slashed down. The flames of annihilation surrounded the saber and burned the rules. The saber and sword collided and a powerful wave spread out. The sword intent instantly suppressed the saber radiance. It was not that Chu Xiu's saber technique was inferior to Mu Baishuang's sword technique, but that the power of the world's sword Tao was too powerful. It could not be blocked by any saber. Even the flames of annihilation that could melt the rules was suppressed by the sword intent. However, at this moment, at the center of the collision, a green sprout bloomed. Creation of yin and yang, reincarnation and rebirth. The power of annihilation brought about by the collision of the saber and sword was completely absorbed by the sprout. The sprout that was born from annihilation grew into a towering tree almost instantly. Not only did it absorb the power of Mu Baishuang's sword Tao, but it also absorbed Chu Xiu's saber intent. In the end, it grew to the extreme and shattered into ashes. As the power dissipated, Chu Xiu and Mu Baishuang retreated at the same time. What power is this? Mu Baishuang's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. This was the first time he had encountered a power that even he could not understand. Creation. Chu Xiu spat out these 2 words softly. It was not the demonic Tao of creation, but the pure power of creation. Chu Xiu had used the demonic Tao of creation as a foundation to touch the power of yin and yang. When facing Yi Weikong, Chu Xiu had truly activated the power of yin and yang and used the worldly millstone. This made him have a deeper understanding of the power of origin. Now, Chu Xiu's understanding of this Tao had even surpassed that of the demonic Tao itself. It was not the demonic Tao of creation, but pure creation. On the other side, Luo Shan watched the scene on the battlefield. His turbid eyes were filled with defeat. They had lost. Their sword sect was about to lose. Xing Jiuyuan could stall for time, but Yi Guixia could not. Moreover, that Qinqing Di had appeared out of nowhere. His battle prowess was simply shocking, and he was becoming more and more courageous as he fought. At the beginning, he was suppressed by Mingjilan, but now, he was able to suppress her. The most important thing was on Chu Xiu's side. Mu Baishuang was actually unable to suppress Chu Xiu, who was at the third heaven, with his strength at the seventh heaven. They were even fighting back and forth. If this continued, their sword sect would definitely lose. At the thought of this, Luo Shan let out a long sigh. He waved the through heaven sword in his hand and said in a low voice, "Open the heavenly sword formation." There were a few disciples of the sword sect beside Luo Shan. When they heard this, they were instantly stunned. Sect leader, who will control the sword formation? Of course it will be me. Is there anyone else who can control the sword formation? That disciple instantly became agitated. Sect leader. You've already exhausted yourself, you can't attack anymore. The through heaven sword is not a Daoist existence. If you forcefully use the through heaven sword now, you will suffer a backlash. Open the sword formation. Luo Shan repeated his words, and his tone was unquestionable. In the sword sect, Luo Shan was actually very amiable most of the time. There were even some martial artists of the sword sect who were afraid of Mu Baishuang, but not Luo Shan. But now that Luo Shan had spoken with certainty, no one dared to refute him. The remaining heaven and earth mysterious realm martial artists attacked together. They infused their qi and blood into their long swords and stabbed them into the ground. Then, they formed a seal with their hands. Although it looked simple, a formation with soaring sword intent instantly appeared. Of course, all these were not important. The most important thing in the through heaven sword formation was the through heaven sword. Luo Shan waved his hand and infused his last bit of strength into the through heaven sword. He stabbed it into the center of the formation. Instantly, the sword qi in the through heaven sword formation soared into the sky. Fang Qi Shao, apart from the martial immortals, you have the highest attainment in sword principle. I can't move anymore, so you will control the through heaven sword. Remember, you only have one chance to attack, and only one attack. Unleash your karma sword principle to its strongest state. I don't expect you to kill Chu Xiu with this attack. As long as you can hit Chu Xiu with this attack and injure him severely, the sword sect of the world will be able to turn the tables. Fang Qi Shao did not participate in the battle previously. He had a very high status in the sword sect of the world. It had been a long time since there was a genius disciple like Fang Qi Shao in the next generation of the sword sect of the world. Therefore, the sword sect of the world was afraid that he would be killed in the chaos, so they only let him guard the back. At this moment, all the martial immortals had been sent out. Luo Shan also had no more combat power. In the entire sword sect of the world, the only person who had the ability to wield the through heaven sword was Fang Qi Shao. Moreover, his karma sword principle was more suitable for this attack than the others. However, when Fang Qi Shao heard Luo Shan ask him to attack, a complicated expression appeared on his face. He slowly walked to the center of the formation, but his hand could not hold the hilt of his sword no matter what. Seeing that Chu Xiu and Mu Baishuang had started fighting fiercely again, Luo Shan shouted in a low voice, "Attack quickly. Don't hesitate anymore." Guixia and Ming Zhilan can't hold on any longer. Attack and kill Chu Xiu. The victory or defeat of the sword sect of the world is in your hands. Hearing Luo Shan's urging, Fang Qixiao's usual unruly expression disappeared and was replaced with a very conflicted expression. After a while, he gritted his teeth and held the through heaven sword tightly. In an instant, the sword ray shot up to the sky and connected the earth. However, immediately after that, Fang Qixiao did not pull out the through heaven sword and slashed at Chu Xiu. Instead, he suddenly rotated the hilt of the sword and poured the power of the through heaven sword into the earth. In an instant, the earth was torn apart. The earth turned over and the mountains and rivers roared angrily. The bodies of the surrounding warriors who had set up the formation swayed and they immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The sword formation was completely destroyed. Meanwhile, Fang Qixiao's face was pale. He had used up all his strength to counteract the backlash of the through heaven sword. Although he was not the one who provided the power of the through heaven sword, merely holding this supreme weapon and slashing it once was enough to exhaust his strength. Facing the disbelieving and complicated gazes of Luo Shan and the other warriors of the sword sect of the world, Fang Qixiao spread out his hands and laughed bitterly. "I'm sorry, I'm under cover." Chapter 1361. At this moment, Fang Qixiao's mood was very complicated. He regretted being a spy. Previously, when Chu Xiu asked him to be a spy, he was quite happy. He thought that it was a very fun thing. He could finally get rid of the boring life of a sect leader in Sword King City. However, after being a spy for a period of time, Fang Qixiao realized that he seemed to be wrong. Humans were not plants. How could they be emotionless? After all, Fang Qixiao had stayed in the World Sword Sect for a long time. The people of the World Sword Sect treated him quite well. He really could not bear to kill them at the critical moment. The battle had already reached this stage. Fang Qixiao originally thought that there was nothing left for him to do. He could watch the show from the back and end his life as a spy. However, he did not expect that he still had to make a choice in the end. Of course, this choice was very easy to make. Fang Qixiao and Chu Xiu had been friends for so many years. There was no doubt that he would choose Chu Xiu no matter what the situation was. However, this situation made him feel a little apologetic. Although he was a spy, he felt like a traitor at this time. Fang Qixiao had always had a bottom line. Although he didn't pay when visiting a brothel, although he wasted his time by drinking, although he infuriated the seniors of Sword King City to the point of wanting to tear him apart, he knew that he was an upright young man. However, today's matter made him deviate from his bottom line. This made him feel a little uncomfortable. At this moment, as Fang Qixiao cut off the last hope of the World Sword Sect, the entire place suddenly fell silent. Luo Shan suddenly laughed. His voice was filled with sadness. He suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Defeated, completely defeated. Mu Baishuang even pointed at Chu Xiu and shouted angrily, "Chu Xiu! You're shameless." Chu Xiu's expression did not change. He said indifferently, "When a crow lands on a pig, don't say who's the bad guy." In order to attack the East region, the World Sword Sect joined hands with the traitor Yi Weikong. Didn't you play the same trick? Why is the World Sword Sect scheming when I use it and shameless when I use it? Not only Mu Baishuang, but all the martial artists of the World Sword Sect were aggrieved and angry, but they could not say anything. Although the World Sword Sect was a little domineering sometimes, they were straightforward and did not play any tricks. Although Yi Weikong had used his identity to become a traitor, it was not the Sword Sect of the world who had taken the initiative to instigate Yi Weikong. Instead, Yi Weikong had delivered himself to their doorstep. On the other side, Fang Baidu and Su Tianya looked at each other, and a look of horror appeared in their eyes. They had always thought that Chu Xiu had prepared the undercover for them. They had never expected that he had actually laid an ambush in the sword sect of the world. In fact, the key to this move was not the spy, but the person to be the spy. Putting aside the fact that Long Longer and Luo Feiheng were so compatible with his talent, Fang Qishao's appearance was unreasonable. When they were in the World Sword Sect, they had seen Fang Qishao before. They had some understanding of this young man who seemed unreliable but was actually a genius. He was definitely a martial immortal seedling and a sword genius who could reach the 9th heaven in the future. Compared to Fang Qishao, Sheng Jiuyuan's disciple, Yu Wenfu, was a piece of **t. Therefore, logically speaking, a sword genius of this level should either be in the hands of Gu Zun or in the World Sword Sect. The possibility of him being outside was extremely small. However, Fang Qishao was an exception. The entire World Sword Sect, including them, did not think that Fang Qishao was a spy. Based on normal thinking, who would make a genius among geniuses like Fang Qishao a spy? It was such a waste. But now, everything was beyond his imagination. Fang Qishao was a spy. Where did Chu Xiu find so many young genius martial artists? At this moment, the people from the World Sword Sect came to their senses. Although the ethereal enlightenment state martial artists who set up the heavenly sword formation were suffering from the backlash, they still had some fighting power. Those people cursed the 7th young master Fang for being a traitor and so on as they charged toward him. Fang Qishao had already exhausted all his strength after suffering the backlash from the heavenly sword formation. He could only smile bitterly and close his eyes. When Chu Xiu saw this, he immediately shouted, "Save him!" The illusory moon will in Long Longer's hand rose and a moonlight enveloped Fang Qishao, dragging him into the space of the illusory moon wheel. The illusory moon wheel was a treasure used for defense. It was equivalent to an individual space secret realm. Even a martial immortal would not be able to tear it apart easily. Long Longer made another hand seal and Fang Qishao was teleported to his side. Luo Feiheng pointed at Fang Qishao's head and said with a look of exasperation, "Aren't you usually smart? Why can't you use your brain at a time like this? Why did you slash the ground? You should have slashed Luo Shan, Mu Baishuang and the people around you. Why did you put yourself in danger?" Fang Qishao said helplessly, "Big sister, it's easy for you to say. After all, we've known each other for so long. I can't do it. It's easy for you to be a spy. Your master has been instigated to defect. Can I instigate the World Sword Sect to defect? If it were you, would you have the heart to do it?" Luo Feiheng was stunned. He suddenly hit Fang Qishao's head. "Who are you calling big sister? You're a few years older than me. Why are you calling me big sister?" Fang Qishao's strength was exhausted. He could not resist at all. He could only say with a bitter face, "Little sister Feiheng, slap." Fang Qishao's head was hit again. "Who are you calling little sister Feiheng? You even dare to tease me?" Fang Qishao immediately stopped talking. It was too difficult. He decided not to stoop to her level. At this moment, Luo Shan sighed. He used the last bit of his strength and shouted, "Retreat! Everyone retreat!" Mu Baishuang's eyes were red. They were filled with unwillingness. But what else could he do? Abandon the entire World Sword Sect here? He could only follow Luo Shan's instructions and led the people of the World Sword Sect to retreat. But how could Chu Xiu watch as the World Sword Sect retreated so smoothly under his watch? With a command, the people of the Kunlun Devil cult immediately charged forward. They attacked with all their might, leaving as many as they could. Mu Baishuang ordered his men to retreat with Luo Shan first. He and the other sword venerables used all their strength to stop Chu Xiu, allowing the other martial artists of the World Sword Sect to retreat first. The World Sword Sect did this much more openly than the War God Sect. They did not give up on any of their disciples. They only chose to escape after all the disciples had retreated. However, the price they had to pay was huge. Mu Baishuang had to protect the disciples and was heavily injured by Chu Xiu. Yi Guixia was also heavily injured. Mingji Lan was the worst off. His heart meridian was struck by Qinqing Di, who was full of fighting spirit. His body was shattered, and only his primordial spirit escaped with his sword. Without his body, even if he could recover in the future, his strength would never be able to surpass his current peak. Only Sheng Jiuyuan was not injured. Of course, he was not a member of the World Sword Sect, and there was no need for him to risk his life to protect the disciples of the World Sword Sect. After a round of killing, in order to prevent the people of the World Sword Sect from acting in desperation, Chu Xiu's men did not pursue them to the end. After all, they had experienced 2 big battles in a row, and their strength was almost depleted. When Chu Xiu returned with his men, Qin Baiyuan was in the ruins of High Firmament City. He was silent, as if he was in a daze. To be precise, there was no longer High Firmament City. The use of the High Firmament Wuji seal and the Through Heaven sword tore the sky and earth apart. The previously magnificent High Firmament City was directly smashed into pieces, and it was a complete mess. Cult Master Chu, High Firmament Sect is gone. The expression on Qin Baiyuan's face was extremely bitter. A sect with 10,000 years of history was destroyed in the hands of his generation. This was a heavy blow to Qin Baiyuan. Chu Xiu comforted him, "Old sect master Qin, please restrain your grief. I also feel sorry for sect master Fang's death. Although sect master Fang is dead, High Firmament Sect is still here. Right now, High Firmament Sect still has a younger generation of cultivators and cultivation techniques. Even if High Firmament Sect is destroyed, we can just build another one. It's just a city. As long as there are people, we can build 8 to 10 High Firmament Sects." Chu Xiu changed the topic, but this time, the Southern Territory's invasion has actually taught the Eastern Territory a lesson. The outside world says that the Southern Territory's martial arts world is a mess of dragons and snakes, and is in a state of disunity. But in reality, it is the Eastern Territory that is in a state of disunity. This time, when the Southern Territory's martial arts world attacked, how many experts did the World Sword Sect gather with a single order? This is very difficult to achieve in the Eastern Territory. The era of great competition has arrived. The 4 territories are contending for hegemony, and powerhouses are gathering. Unless one has the strength of the 3 Pure Temple, a single sect can forget about standing out in this era of great competition. So, we have decided to hold the Eastern Territory Alliance Conference in half a month at Kunlun Devil Cult to discuss the direction of the Eastern Territory's martial arts world. At the very least, we have to discuss a strategy to defend against the enemy. We can't just passively take a beating like we did today. Qin Baiyuan opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't say anything. In the end, he just sighed and said, "Rest assured, Cult Master Chu. I will definitely be there in half a month." After saying that, Chu Xiu also left with the many disciples of Kunlun Devil Cult. After fighting the Emperor Heaven Pavilion and High Firmament Sect continuously, the disciples under Chu Xiu had basically exhausted their strength. In fact, there was still Cold River City that had not been resolved, but there was no need to worry about that. When Yi Weikong attacked Kunlun Devil Cult, he brought the elites of Cold River City with him. Those who stayed behind in Cold River City were only some old, weak, sick, and disabled people. So, when Chu Xiu took a breather, he could casually send Lu Jianghe or Chu Wuji, and other heaven and earth profound illumination realm martial artists to bring a group of people over, and they could easily take down Cold River City. After all, the monk could run away, but the temple could not. At present, the most important thing for Chu Xiu was the Eastern Territory Alliance Conference. This conference would completely decide who was the real master of the entire Eastern Territory's martial arts world. Chapter 1362. The battle where the sword sect of the world joined forces with all the sects of the southern territory to attack the eastern territory was so sudden that the entire world did not have time to react. When they were done fighting, all kinds of news and rumors came from the Jianghu, but the result was somewhat unacceptable. The eastern territory was weak. This was the consensus of the four territories. Of course, the eastern territory's current weakness could not be blamed. Although part of the reason was the rigid thinking of top sects like High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion, external factors were more important. For example, in the battle 500 years ago, that existence was the first to appear in the Eastern Territory, so the Eastern Territory suffered the most losses. Also, when Cold River City rose, Meng Xinghe and Yi Weikong supported a top sect, which also caused internal strife in the Eastern Territory. At that time, there were also heavy casualties. Therefore, the strength of the current Eastern Territory was not even half as strong as it was 500 years ago. Luo Shan, the world's #1 sword Dao master, joined forces with the Southern Territory to fight the Martial God sect, Great Thousand sect, and 3 famous primordial venerables, but they still lost. This was simply a dream. Moreover, the entire Southern Territory's martial world lost in the hands of Chu Xiu. The sword sect of the world's plan could be said to have no loopholes. The only loophole was Chu Xiu. This guy had planted a spy around the sword sect of the world and the 2 primordial venerables. Although he did not completely rely on them to reverse the situation, he still decided part of the outcome of the battle. After this incident, while the major sects were studying this matter, they also immediately began to investigate their own sects to see if there were any spies from other sections. It could be said that Chu Xiu's action had stirred up the entire Daoist people. Of course, the investigation was one thing, but Xinmo was not affected at all. The major sects were investigating new disciples. Xinmo was now playing the role of Ji Xinlua, a disciple who grew up in the Sanskrit sect, so there was no need to suspect him. At this time, Ji Xinlua was waiting obediently in the hall of the Sanskrit sect's headquarters, waiting for the return of the Sanskrit sect's sect master. In order to keep the Daoist stable before descending, Dao Master had called the Sanskrit sect's sect master and the Heavenly Luo Temple's world venerables to the Northern Territory to discuss the Dao. Of course, this move was useless. These 2 guys who always fought with each other left, but the Western region still almost broke their heads. The Southern region and the Eastern region also had a great war, so the only place that could be considered safe was the Northern region. Renaja and Yama stood there nervously. Both of them were a little nervous. Previously, the sect leader had asked them to watch over the Brahmin sect. But now, they had destroyed one of the 3 halls of the Brahmin sect. They could not afford to make such a mistake. After a long while, black mist began to swirl around the hall. Finally, the mist began to condense into a man wearing a black Sanskrit cloak. The man was tall and slender, and it was impossible to tell his age. The strangest thing was that his face had 2 faces, one yin and one yang, one good and one evil. The face on the left was gentle and gentle. She had a faint smile on her face like a goddess. The other side was ghastly and devilish. His expression was savage and harsh, and he seemed like the reincarnation of an Asura, causing others to shudder with a single glance. He was the Brahmin sect master, a peak Daoist rank 9 martial immortal. The Brahmin sect master did not have a name. The reason for that was because he represented the Brahmin sect from the moment he assumed the position of sect master. Thus, he did not need a name. It was just like the heavenly Luo treasure temple's world exalts and the 3 pristine palaces Dao exalts. They no longer represented themselves. Instead, they represented the inheritances and teachings behind them. Names belonged to them. That was not important. Titles, however, belonged to the sect. As long as they remained in their positions, those titles would represent them. We pay our respects to the sect master. Renaja and Yama, as well as the many palace masters and elite disciples of the Brahmin sect's divine palace, all knelt on the ground and paid their respects. Right at that moment, two enormous palms appeared in the sky. The palms suddenly slapped toward the two of them. The two of them were both rank 8 martial immortals. Yet, they did not even dare to dodge the palms. They were directly sent flying and smashed into the ground, creating two large craters. Trash! Idiots! Bastards! The evil face on the right side of the Brahmin sect master scolded, "All these years, when has the Brahmin sect ever lost so miserably?" One of the three great palaces, Vishnu Palace, was destroyed. All the research results of the Brahmin sect's 10,000 years of secret techniques were taken away. What did I tell you before? Even if I sent 2 pigs to guard here, we would not have lost so miserably. Rinaja and Yama were bleeding from the corners of their mouths. However, they did not dare to wipe it off or explain. They quickly knelt and said, "We have sinned. Please punish us, sect master." At that moment, the good face on the left side of the Brahmin sect master spoke softly, "You still know that you have sinned? But then again, it wasn't all their fault." Tian Luobao and Chana's group of bald donkeys looked honest and straightforward, but in fact, their hearts were very dirty, and they could come up with all kinds of plots and schemes. Chu Xiu, who destroyed Vishnu Palace, is also not someone easy to deal with. The news has just spread that even Luo Shan, that old fellow, had gathered so many forces, but was still defeated by him. The news of Luo Shan forcefully controlling the heavenly sword was spreading in the pugilistic world. Luo Shan might not be able to hold on for much longer. Some people even said that Luo Shan was already dead. However, the sword sect of the world was just bluffing, so they did not do anything. Even the experts of the 9th heaven suffered a great loss at the hands of Chu Xiu. This is understandable. Rinaja and Yama instantly heaved a sigh of relief. They quickly thanked him, "Thank you, sect master, for your understanding." However, the next moment, the topic suddenly changed to the evil face. Pardonable? Bullsh *t. If they are strong, that is their business. If you are weak, that is your business. You know that Tian Luobao Sha is coming at you fiercely, but you still didn't take the entire Vishnu Palace back to the headquarters of the Brahmin sect. What is in your head? Rinaja and Yama looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with bitterness. Here it goes again. Actually, the sect leader of the Brahmin sect was very normal in the past. But for the Daoist martial immortals, as long as they stepped into the 9th heaven, they all wanted to pursue the pinnacle realm above the 9th heaven. In the past, the Daoist martial immortals were not so stubborn. But ever since they saw the existence that almost through the entire Daoist martial immortals 500 years ago, as well as the old Daoist who stayed in the Daoist divine palace, they knew that the 9th heaven was far from the pinnacle. There was still a path above, a longer path. So from then on, the Daoist martial immortals who reached the 9th heaven rarely appeared in the Jianghu. Everyone was searching for the path to the pinnacle above the 9th heaven. It was the same for the sect leader of the Brahmin sect. However, his path seemed to have gone astray. No one knew what he was researching, but he ended up like this. He was one with two sides, and even his spirit seemed to have been split into two. From time to time, he would suffer from schizophrenia. Although the sect leader of the Brahmin sect had become stronger, his subordinates were suffering unspeakably. They were afraid of provoking the sect leader of the Brahmin sect in his current state. After cursing the two of them, the sect leader of the Brahmin sect's good and evil sides finally seemed to reconcile. He snorted coldly and said, "Stand guard here. I'll go to the eastern region to kill Chu Xiu and take back all the face you've lost." Rinaja was stunned. He was about to say something, but Yanma pulled him back and gave him a meaningful look. When the sect leader of the Brahmin sect turned into a black mist and disappeared, Yanma said, "The sect leader's emotions are so unstable right now. Why are you stopping him?" Rinaja frowned. "The sect leader can't kill Chu Xiu. The obstacles are too great. For example, Yanma said indifferently, there's no need for examples. You're not the only smart person in this world. The sect leader won't even be able to leave the western region. However, the sect leader is angry now. If you don't let him vent his anger, won't we be the unlucky ones? Renaja was stunned. He had always felt that Yanma was a madman who only knew how to kill. Now, it seemed that his judgment of the sect leader was much more accurate than others. At this moment, the sect leader of the Brahmin sect was walking on the western region. Black wind swept by, and his figure could hardly be seen. The speed of a ninth heaven expert was extremely fast. Within a day, he had actually reached the border between the western region and the southern barbaric lands. But there was an old monk standing there. He wore a tattered monk robe and was barefooted. He wore a golden bamboo hat on his head that was engraved with scriptures. Because the bamboo hat covered the upper half of his face, others could only see the slightly messy beard on his chin. He shouldn't be young. The moment he saw the old monk, the black mist around the sect leader of the Brahmin sect transformed into his figure. He said coldly, "Old bald donkey, you want to stop me?" There was only one person in the western region who could be looked at so seriously by the sect leader of the Brahmin sect. That was the world venerable of this generation. The world venerable shook his head. "This poor monk isn't stopping you. I'm waiting for you." You heard Dao Venerable's words. The upper and lower realms are about to connect. Everyone should be more stable and wait for the arrival of the new era. Isn't that good? Stable? Bald donkey, hypocrite. If your heavenly Luo treasure temple's life transformation pavilion is destroyed, can you still be at ease? The world venerable shook his head. If it is, then it is. If it isn't, then it isn't. There are no ifs in this world. The sect leader of the Brahmin sect's face distorted. His evil face and his good face were also distorted. Old bald donkey. Stop talking about these useless things. Your heavenly Luo sect has already benefited, and you still want to pretend to be obedient? Are you going to step aside or not? The world venerable's eyes couldn't be seen under the bamboo hat, but at this moment, there were two cold glints. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. If you call this poor monk bald donkey, this poor monk will endure it. If you call this poor monk bald donkey twice, this poor monk will suppress his anger and maintain his state of mind. If you call this poor monk bald donkey thrice. The next moment, as the world venerable put his palms together, the entire earth and sky seemed to be closed together. There was no longer a sun in the world. Instead, it was replaced by a Vairocana Dharma that covered the sky. This poor monk will kill the heretic. Chapter 1363. The southern and eastern regions were locked in a fierce battle, while the western regions had two ninth-layer experts fighting. In the entire Daoist region, the northern regions were the most stable. Perhaps it was because with the Dao master around, anyone who dared to cause trouble in the northern regions was basically courting death. On the northern Sky Pillar Mountain. After teaching the disciples of the Galaxy Martial Arts Institution, Meng Xinghe returned to the mountain summit to play chess. No one knew who Meng Xinghe was playing chess with. Perhaps it was himself, or perhaps it was the world. In the eastern regions, Chu Xiu's Kunlun Devil cult was developing well, and the Galaxy Martial Arts Institution was doing even better. After all, Meng Xinghe was a peak ninth-layer martial immortal and the most famous existence in the ancient sovereign's lineage. With Meng Xinghe's personal teaching, this kind of opportunity was a great opportunity that one could only dream of in the past, but now, it was available to everyone. How could the northern region's independent cultivators and cultivators from small sects give up on this opportunity? Therefore, the cultivators who came to join the Galaxy Martial Arts Institution flocked to it like ducks. Because the Galaxy Martial Arts Institution didn't have any sectarian bias, disciples from large sects like the mysterious Heaven Realm would sometimes attend the lectures. At this moment, Meng Xinghe's mind suddenly trembled when a black piece fell. The black piece and the entire chessboard instantly shattered. Meng Xinghe looked at his hands with a puzzled look in his eyes. What exactly happened? Even I, a ninth heavenly layer martial immortal, am unable to control my own power? At this moment, another ancient sovereign of the Galaxy Martial Arts Institution, Fang Daochen, walked in and said cautiously, "Dean, there's some news from the martial world that might be related to you." Meng Xinghe's expression remained unchanged. "Oh? What news?" Fang Daochen pondered for a moment and chose his words carefully. In the end, he just sighed and said one sentence. "Yi Weikong died in the hands of Chu Xiu." Meng Xinghe's expression didn't change when he heard this, but Fang Daochen, who was next to him, already had a look of horror in his eyes. The cultivation method of his lineage was very unique. It did not focus on strength, but instead pursued the slightest change in strength, using small to fight big. Therefore, even the slightest ripple could not be hidden from him. It was not just his power, but his primordial spirit and mental state as well. At this moment, although Meng Xinghe's expression didn't change, and his power didn't leak out, his state of mind was like a raging storm that was sweeping madly like a world-destroying flood in Fang Daochen's eyes. Meng Xinghe's current state of mind was indeed not calm, and it was not easy for him to maintain his composure on the surface. Meng Xinghe had told Chu Xiu during the ancient sovereign assembly that he and Yi Weikong had taken different paths and would not interfere with each other's choices. Naturally, they would not get entangled with each other. At that time, that was what Meng Xinghe thought. But in reality, only when he heard the news of Yi Weikong's death did he realize that he was mistaken. He couldn't let it go. Although the path he chose was different from Yi Weikong's, they had been friends for hundreds of years, and they had fought countless bloody battles. How could he let it go just like that? Meng Xinghe raised his head to look at the starry sky. In a trance, he seemed to see the young man he met when he first stepped out of the savage jungle. The young man who was bold and heroic, who clamored to make himself the sect leader of the #1 sect in the Eastern Territory, and who would trample on the High Heaven sect and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. He was in his prime, full of heroic spirit. It was precisely because of this that Meng Xinghe, who had always been quiet and gentle, was attracted to him and followed him to explore the Jianghu. They built Cold River City and created a legend of the Jianghu of the Eastern Territory. But later, the two sides diverged. The heroic dreams of youth would be erased by time. Yi Weikong only wanted to make Cold River City a top sect in the Eastern Territory, and no longer be oppressed by the High Heaven sect and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. He achieved it, but he lost his goal and his old dreams. But Meng Xinghe was different. He wanted to be bigger and farther than Cold River City. He wanted to be above the endless starry sky. So the two sides parted ways. Back then, they got together because of their dreams. Now, they also parted ways because of their dreams. They went their own ways. After a long while, Meng Xinghe said two words softly, "Big Brother Yi." He hadn't called him this for many years, and he hadn't seen Yi Weikong for many years. He thought he could let go of the past, but the Great Way was heartless. How could he let go of the friendship of more than 100 years so easily? Meng Xinghe moved his hand, and a golden horsetail whisk appeared in his hand. A Daoist sword with a red sandalwood scabbard also fell on his back. Fang Daochen was startled. "Dean, what are you doing?" Meng Xinghe pointed at his chest and said, "I have a knot in my heart. If I don't get rid of it, I have no hope of reaching the Great Way. I'm going to cut off the knot in my heart." Fang Daochen still wanted to say something, but Meng Xinghe had already turned into a starlight and disappeared on the spot. Fang Daochen slapped his thigh anxiously. Of course, he knew what Meng Xinghe was going to do. If it were any other time, let alone killing Chu Xiu, Meng Xinghe wouldn't care even if he turned the entire Eastern Territory upside down. But now, at such a sensitive time, any accident could cause variables to appear in their previous plans. Even now, Fang Daochen couldn't help but blame Yi Weikong, who was already dead. "You're dead, but you're still causing trouble for me." At this time, Chu Xiu didn't know that because of him, all the Daoist forces had fallen into chaos. He was now preparing for the Eastern Territory Alliance Convention. Now, there were only 3 truly great forces in the entire Eastern Territory: Kunlun Devil Cult, High Heaven Sect, and Imperial Sky Pavilion. As for the remaining small forces, 50% had joined the Kunlun Devil Cult, while 30% were some hardcore vassal forces of High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion. The other 20% were still outside of these great forces. These were either small forces that were slow to react and really didn't have much ambition, or medium forces that had decent strength but some ambition and were unwilling to submit to others. This time, Chu Xiu called all of them here for one thing, and that was to unify the entire Eastern Territory. In the square of the Kunlun Devil Cult, the leaders of the various forces of the Eastern Territory gathered again. It hadn't been long since they last came to the Kunlun Devil Cult. Previously, during the founding ceremony of the Kunlun Devil Cult, they, as the leaders of the major forces of the Eastern Territory, had all sent people here. They didn't expect to be here again so soon. This time, everyone present was whispering to each other. Even the slowest person could feel a trace of uneasiness and a trace of something wrong. The Southern Territory had gathered the forces of all the great forces to attack the Eastern Territory, causing a storm. Now, Chu Xiu had called them all here. What did he mean by that? Everyone present looked at the seats of honor, where Zhong Qiushui and Qin Baiyuan were sitting. However, they didn't see anything valuable from the looks of these two. In the previous battle, both the Imperial Sky Pavilion and the High Heaven Sect had suffered heavy losses. In particular, the High Heaven Sect was almost completely wiped out. All of its elites were scattered, leaving only the old and the young, barely leaving behind a trace of their inheritance. After suffering such a big loss, they all looked as if they didn't want anyone to get close to them. After a while, Chu Xiu walked out of the inner hall, followed by Wei Shuya, Chen Qingdi, Su Tianya, and Fang Baidu. Everyone present suddenly felt a chill in their hearts. It wasn't until now that they realized that so many masters had gathered around Chu Xiu. There were actually 5 martial immortals in the entire Kunlun Devil Cult, which was already more than when the High Heaven Sect was at its peak. Everyone stood up and bowed respectfully to Chu Xiu. "Greetings, Cult Master Chu." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "No need to be so courteous, everyone. I've gathered all of you here today, and I believe that all of you already know what's going on. The Daoist continent has been peaceful for 10,000 years. In the past, it was just the 4 territories fighting and quarreling, but now, it's about to evolve into an era of great conflict, a war between the 4 territories. Under such circumstances, no one in the entire Eastern Territory can remain unscathed." At this point, a sorrowful look appeared on Chu Xiu's face. Just like a few days ago, the Southern Territory launched a surprise attack on our Eastern Territory. Both the Imperial Sky Pavilion and the High Heaven Sect suffered heavy losses, and the Kunlun Devil Cult was almost killed by the traitor of Cold River City. We suffered heavy losses. Everyone present had a strange look on their faces. As far as they knew, it was true that the Imperial Sky Pavilion and the High Heaven Sect suffered heavy losses, but when did the Kunlun Devil Cult suffer heavy losses? Of course, none of the people present dared to undermine Chu Xiu at this time. Everyone present listened to what he said. Chu Xiu then said, "Learn from the mistakes of the past. The Eastern Territory cannot make the same mistake a second time. So this time, I've gathered all of you here for one thing, and that is to unite the forces of the entire Eastern Territory and establish the Eastern Territory Alliance to fight against foreign enemies together." No one present said a word. After a long while, someone stood up and asked, "May I ask, Cult Master Chu, what can we get by joining this Eastern Territory Alliance? What price do we have to pay?" Before Chu Xiu could answer, Zhong Qiushui suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, "The Imperial Sky Pavilion is willing to merge with the Kunlun Devil Cult and become a vassal sect of the Kunlun Devil Cult. From now on, we will be at your disposal without any objections." As soon as these words came out, everyone present suddenly went into an uproar. Even Chu Xiu did not expect that Zhong Qiushui would make such a decision. The Imperial Sky Pavilion was a top sect that stood at the peak of the lower realm 10,000 years ago. Such an existence naturally had its own dignity. They could be destroyed, but they could not be surrendered. Just like when the Battle God sect and the Kiliakosm sect attacked the Imperial Sky Pavilion, even though the Imperial Sky Pavilion was forced to a dead end at that time, Zhong Qiushui would rather fight to the death than surrender. Why would he choose to become a vassal of the Kunlun Devil Cult now? Chapter 1364. Zhong Qiushui was a realistic person. To be more precise, he was a person who could recognize reality, just like what he was doing now. The Imperial Sky Pavilion had no future in his hands. In the world of great battles, it was useless even if the Imperial Sky Pavilion had a martial immortal like him. This time, the Imperial Sky Pavilion could not even defend against the combined forces of the Martial God sect and the Kiliakosm sect. How were they going to defend against stronger enemies in the future? Moreover, Zhong Qiushui knew Chu Xiu very well. Ever since Chu Xiu interfered with the Pavilion Master's battle in the Imperial Sky Pavilion, Zhong Qiushui knew what kind of person Chu Xiu was. Zhong Qiushui did not dare to say that he knew Chu Xiu very well. However, he knew that Chu Xiu was an ambitious person. The Eastern Region Alliance meeting was said to defend against external enemies, but in reality, who was the leader of the alliance? Apart from Chu Xiu, who else could it be? In that instant, Zhong Qiushui thought about many things. Perhaps joining the Kunlun Devil Cult was the only way out for the Imperial Sky Pavilion now. Joining the Imperial Sky Pavilion on their own accord still owed them a favor. If they were forced to join, it would be too late. Moreover, Chu Xiu's Kunlun Devil Cult did not require the vassal sects to completely give up everything they had. As long as the Imperial Sky Pavilion's inheritance was intact, he would not be considered to have let down his ancestors. Chu Xiu looked at Zhong Qiushui. He was stunned for a moment before he quickly said, "What are you doing, Pavilion Master Zhong? I'm talking about an alliance. I'm not asking everyone to join the Kunlun Devil Cult." Zhong Qiushui shook his head and said, "Cult Master Chu, I've thought it through. Given the Imperial Sky Pavilion's current strength, we're no longer qualified to ally with the Kunlun Devil Cult. If the Imperial Sky Pavilion can be breached once, it can be breached a second time. Instead of living in fear every day, it's better to find someone who can shoulder the Eastern region's banner. In the entire Eastern region, apart from you, Cult Master Chu, who else is qualified to shoulder the responsibility?" Zhong Qiushui had always been a very serious person, but when such a serious person started to compliment others, it would be more effective. Chu Xiu did not decline. He nodded and said, "In that case, the Kunlun Devil Cult welcomes Pavilion Master Zhong to join us." As he spoke, Chu Xiu turned his gaze to the people present and said in a deep voice, "Pavilion Master Zhong has joined the Kunlun Devil Cult, but I don't require everyone to join as well. However, the Great Eastern Region Alliance was established for the benefit of the entire Eastern region to fight against foreign enemies, so everyone only needs to do one thing. That is to open the sect and let a portion of the Kunlun Devil Cult's disciples settle in. Also, we'll set up a communication formation to facilitate communication. As for what you will gain, it is very simple. You will be safe. No matter what enemies attack from the outside, the Kunlun Devil Cult will be able to rush over as soon as we receive the news. This is the first and last time the sects of the Southern Territory have raided the Eastern Territory. As soon as these words came out, everyone present wore different expressions as they discussed among themselves. At this time, Qin Baiyuan suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, "My High Heaven sect agrees to this." Now that High Heaven sect had been destroyed, Qin Baiyuan's heart was already dead. If it were not for the fact that High Heaven sect still had a young disciple left, Qin Baiyuan might have already retired to the mountains. No matter what ambitions Chu Xiu had, at least this matter was beneficial to High Heaven sect. The current High Heaven sect was no longer the number one sect in the Eastern Territory, so there was no other choice but to obediently submit. Of the previous two major sects of the Eastern Territory, one chose to merge with the Kunlun Devil cult while the other agreed to the alliance. Most of the sect leaders present nodded in agreement after hesitating for a moment. The Southern Territory's invasion of the Eastern Territory this time had indeed caused a great impact on them. If the Southern Territory's raid was successful, what awaited them would be a full-scale attack from the entire Southern Territory. However, there were still some cultivators who were a little reluctant. Chu Xiu had set up a communication spirit array in their sect and even sent a disciple to guard it. What secrets would their sect have to the Kunlun Devil cult? What was the difference between that and becoming a vassal of the Kunlun Devil cult? Therefore, the cultivator who had asked before stood up again and said after considering his tone, "Cult Master Chu, we are willing to join the Eastern Territory Alliance. After all, this is a good thing that benefits the entire Eastern Territory. But the problem is that the Kunlun Devil cult will station a disciple in our sect. Do you think we should reconsider?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. He was a little surprised. He didn't expect that after the Southern Territory invaded the Eastern Territory and Royal Sky Pavilion and High Heaven sect chose to join the Eastern Territory Alliance, there would still be people who dared to raise objections. But before Chu Xiu could speak, Zhong Qiushui suddenly said, "Cool Breeze Faction Sect Master Su, I remember that your Cool Breeze faction is within the sphere of influence of Cold River City, right? Previously, Yi Weikong tried to rope you in many times, and your two sects are very close. This time, Yi Weikong betrayed the Eastern Territory and used Cold River City as a springboard to attract the Southern Territory cultivators. Your two sects are so close, how could you not know?" Sect Master Su hurriedly said, "Pavilion Master Zhong, don't slander me. What does Yi Weikong's betrayal of the Eastern Territory have to do with me? It's not like I betrayed the Eastern Territory. No matter how close I am to him, Yi Weikong won't tell me such a thing." Zhong Qiushui said indifferently, "Slander? Now, Cult Master Chu has established the Eastern Territory Alliance for the sake of the safety of the entire Eastern Territory, but you've come up with all sorts of excuses. In my opinion, you're clearly the same as Yi Weikong and have long since colluded with the Southern Territory. In this life, what I hate the most are traitors." Without waiting for Sect Master Su to speak, Zhong Qiushui directly formed seals with his hands, and the Royal Heavenly Treasure seal descended with a loud bang, sealing the space around Sect Master Su, and actually killing the seal directly. Turning his head, Zhong Qiushui cupped his hands at Chu Xiu and said, "I acted on my own accord, please forgive me, Cult Master Chu." Zhong Qiushui's identity changed very quickly. From an ally to a subordinate, then he had to act like a subordinate. Sharing the burden of his superior was something he should do, and at this time, it was most suitable for him to play the role of the bad guy. Chu Xiu smiled faintly and said, "Pavilion Master Zhong helped the Eastern Territory to eradicate the traitors, this is a good thing. What is there to forgive?" Chu Xiu then turned his gaze to the other cultivators present, and said indifferently, "Pavilion Master Zhong's Imperial Sky Pavilion suffered a great loss because some disciples with weak wills betrayed the Eastern Territory, causing them to fight a little fiercely. Everyone, please don't take it to heart. However, what Pavilion Master Zhong said also makes sense. At this time, the Eastern Territory can no longer tolerate people being half-hearted. So, does anyone have a different opinion now?" Everyone present looked at each other, stood up, cupped their hands, and said, "We're willing to listen to Cult Master Chu's arrangements." Those who had disagreed earlier did not even have a complete corpse now. How could they possibly have any objections? Chu Xiu waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "All right then. Today, the Eastern Territory Alliance is officially established. We'll defend the Eastern Territory together against external enemies." Just as the people from the various sects below were about to shout their slogan, starlight shone in midair. This was a very strange scene. It was clearly daytime, but the dazzling starlight had even overshadowed the scorching sunlight. In midair, Meng Xinghe stepped on the starlight and descended. His expression was calm as he landed in the center of the Kunlun Devil Cult Square. Previously, those formations of the Kunlun Demon sect were like nothing in front of him. In fact, they didn't even make a single sound before they dissipated completely. Seeing that Meng Xinghe had appeared here, Chu Xiu's expression did not change in the slightest. However, behind him, the expressions of Fang Baidu and Su Tianya changed slightly. Obviously, they had thought of something. They knew the relationship between Meng Xinghe and Yi Weikong. It should be said that the entire Daoist knew about this relationship. However, they did not expect that Meng Xinghe would personally take action. However, the other people present looked at Meng Xinghe with a hint of doubt in their eyes. Who was this? Although Meng Xinghe's name was well known, he rarely appeared in the underworld, including the Eastern Territory where he was famous. Therefore, more than half of the Eastern Territory martial artists present did not know him. Chu Xiu stood up and said with a smile, "Dean Meng, you've come all the way from the Northern Territory to the Eastern Territory. Are you here to participate in the Eastern Territory Alliance Convention?" "Chu Xiu, please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier, Dean Meng." Hearing that Chu Xiu addressed the person in front of him as Dean Meng, the people present were stunned for a moment before they realized who this person was. Who else could be addressed as Dean Meng by Chu Xiu except for Meng Xinghe, who had just established the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy? At the thought of this, the expressions of the people present suddenly became playful. Chu Xiu had killed Yi Weikong. How could Meng Xinghe come here now to participate in the Eastern Territory Alliance Convention? He probably wanted to kill Chu Xiu. Meng Xinghe stared at Chu Xiu in front of him, but there was only the Milky Way flowing in his eyes, making it difficult for people to see whether his eyes were filled with killing intent or hatred. "Chu Xiu, when I invited you to join the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy at the Ancient Venerables Convention, I was sincere. Your martial Dao may seem complicated, but it's the purest martial Dao. I can't see any sectarian bias in you. In the era of great competition, luck is flowing. What you and I pursue is actually the same. At that time, I didn't have any malice toward you. As long as you can join the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy, I'm even willing to give you the position of Vice Dean. But you, why did you refuse?" Meng Xinghe sighed and said, "If you could join the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy, you would be free from the conflict between the Southern and Eastern Territory, and these things would not have happened. Yi Weikong would not have died, and I would not have deliberately come to kill you." The word "kill" was spat out without the slightest killing intent, but everyone present felt as if they had fallen into the coldest winter in an instant. No one expected Meng Xinghe to be so straightforward. He didn't say any dignified words, nor did he use his identity as the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy or the Gu Zun's lineage to suppress others. The cause and effect was that simple. Chu Xiu killed Yi Weikong, so he wanted to kill Chu Xiu. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.